Scotland will be a better place for it.
I regret I'm not going to have time to call Mark MacDonald at question number 20. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 8259 in the name of Joe McAlpin on the Borough Collection, Lending and Borrowing Scotland Bill. Members who wish to take part in the debate should press the request to speak button now, and I call on Joe McAlpin to speak to and move the motion on behalf of the committee. Ms McAlpin, you've got 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to open the preliminary stage for the Borough Collection, Lending and Borrowing Scotland Bill and to provide the Parliament with some background on the bill. Before I do that, can I thank the clerks, Spice, for the considerable work that they've put into informing the committee about the background to the bill, and indeed to all those others who've given written and oral evidence, sometimes travelling from quite a distance. I'd also like to thank the staff of Pollock House for accommodating the committee at its first public sitting, and the staff of the Borough, who gave us a very extensive and interesting tour of the collection, both seen and unseen. Private bills propose laws which allow individuals, groups or individuals or corporate entities to acquire powers or benefits in excess or in conflict with the general law. This bill is the third private bill to be introduced this session, and it is the first that I have worked on. It has been an interesting insight into this side of the Parliament's work. Sir William Burrell, born in 1861, worked from the age of 15 in the family's shipping agency, achieving great financial success. He developed a passion for art from a young age, and as his wealth grew, so did his collection. Before his death in 1958, Burrell gifted an astoundingly broad collection of some 9,000 items that included stained glass, paintings, sculpture, furniture, and even large pieces of architecture. Edinburgh and London were also considered as recipients for the collection, but only Glasgow would agree to the stipulations of the gift. To this day, the bequest represents the largest single gift of art treasures by one person to a single city. Very many of us in Scotland are familiar with the Burrell collection. Visitor numbers reached 1 million in the years following its opening in 1983. And I confess it does seem like yesterday when I, as a young student, went to see the collection in the days after the Queen first opened it on that date. What is perhaps less well known is the buried treasure that is not currently on public display. The committee had the privilege of a behind-the-scenes tour of the collection, as I said, and we were amazed at the important paintings, furniture and architectural pieces that currently have no place in public displays because there is only room to display about 2,000 of the roughly 9,000 items in the collection. Sadly, our tour also revealed the poor state of the building housing the collection, which is, of course, a relatively new building, a modern building. It's now almost 30 years since its completion. By some accounts, the roof has never been quite right, and there's now no hiding the fact that the situation has reached a critical point. The conservators, whose work is to carefully preserve these priceless artefacts, put quite a bit of their energy into designing tarpaulins to catch the drips from the waterlogged ceiling, and it was really very distressing to see what a sad state the building had got into. And although it was not the committee's remit to look into the history of this, I think it would be fair to say that all members of the committee were concerned that there was a poor relationship with the architect and that problems seemed to have been there from the beginning and weren't resolved. Glasgow City Council now plan to renovate the building, however, not only to address the roof problems once and for all, but also to create more display space and to bring some of that buried treasure into public display and allow more people in the city of Glasgow, Scotland and beyond to enjoy Burrell's collection. Turning back to the bill, its purpose is to alter the restrictions that Burrell placed on lending and borrowing when he gave his collection to the people of Glasgow. In short, Burrell was happy for loans to be made within Great Britain but not overseas. He also prohibited the display of items not belonging to the collection alongside items that do. Glasgow City Council wished to allow loans to be made out with Great Britain and for the restriction on borrowing to be relaxed, allowing related works to be displayed alongside those in the collection. All of this would be governed by a lending code, a publicly accessible document which would set out the decision-making process governing any potential loans and would guarantee the involvement of the borough trustees in any final decision. As a committee, we looked at the opportunities and risks of lending beyond Great Britain and tried to put ourselves in Burrell's shoes and to interpret what led him to place restrictions on his bequest. I think it's important at this point to state that there were no official objections to the proposals of the bill. There are many opportunities to be gained by lending the collection further afield. Displaying associated works side by side contributes to knowledge, and we were reassured that lending in the future would be confined to a small number of items and it would be for scholarly purposes. There is a one-off tour planned by the proposers in association with the British Museum. And we believed that this would help raise the profile of the collection, raise the profile of Glasgow, encourage more people to come to see it, as well as hopefully raising some money that would go towards the renovation of the building. I think it is time to put this collection on a world stage and stop hiding it away. We accept that lending is not without risk. However, most of our witnesses agreed that damage tends to occur most often not in transit, but at the point of packing and unpacking. Therefore, it would appear that the risk remains the same whether you are lending inside Great Britain or overseas. We had very particular concerns about moving and redisplaying the more delicate items in the collection, particularly pastels and textiles, and sought specialist evidence on this, which reassured us.
You must draw to a close, please.
It's impossible to know what was in Burrell's mind when he placed these restrictions on his bequest. We know that he wanted to share his collection. Burrell lent regularly within Great Britain, including a contribution to the Great Exhibition at Kelvin Grove. We endorse the view of the promoter and others who contributed to the scrutiny of the bill that a private bill is necessary and appropriate and that there was no alternative means of achieving the same result. I thank all those again who gave evidence. And I move that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the Borough Collection, Lending and Borrowing Scotland Bill, and that the bill should proceed as a private bill.
Many thanks. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop. 6 minutes too, please.
Presiding Officer, I wanted to speak today in my role as Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs, not just to offer some thoughts on the provisions in this private bill, but to emphasise the significance of the Borough Collection as one of Scotland's great cultural assets. As members will be aware, the Borough Collection is one of the most prominent and varied in Scotland, sitting alongside the works of art in our national galleries and museums in terms of its significance to the history of art and antiquities. The 9,000-strong collection was assembled by Sir William Burrell as he travelled widely across the world, and in 1944 was generously gifted to the City of Glasgow, along with the funds to erect a new building with which to house his treasures. Now, nearly 70 years after his bequest, this bill is aimed at securing the long-term sustainability of that building, while looking at new ways to promote his collections to an even wider audience, allowing more people to learn about and enjoy them than ever they have before. To enable this to happen, however, the promoters of the bill, Glasgow City Council, have made the decision to overturn the expressed wishes of Sir William Burrell as he entrusted his collection to the city. This has raised a number of questions about the responsibilities of the Council as the custodian of the collection and about the power of the dead to constrain the actions of those living in a time very different to their own. The Parliamentary Committee, who have been responsible for scrutinising this bill, have had the unenviable task of considering these sensitive issues in their analysis of the evidence. They have weighed up the risks and opportunities offered by the bill and have looked back at Sir William Burrell's lifetime in order to ask themselves what he might have done were he faced with the same questions today in a world where science and technology are markedly different to what he would have known. The committee's analysis has led them to conclude that Burrell was a lender who wanted to share his collection with the people, not just in Glasgow and Scotland, but further afield through loans within Great Britain. He wanted his works of art to be seen and appreciated. This government shares in this belief, and that is why increasing cultural participation by maximising the number and range of people who see collections and visit and enjoy museums is a key aim of Scotland's national strategy for museums and galleries. Allowing lending from the Burrell collection is consistent with this aim, and it would bring the collection to the attention of an international audience and enable people from all over the world to see and appreciate it, thus raising its profile and putting Glasgow and Scotland on an international stage. However, as with anyone who collects items that are of value, Borough was also concerned about the protection and care afforded to his collections, particularly after his death. The committee have found that it was an interest in preservation then that shaped much of Sir William's decision-making, as indeed it is shaping Glasgow City Council's today. Central to this bill is the need to raise much-needed resources to fund the refurbishment and repair of the Borough building. And I don't think there is doubt in the mind of anyone who visits the collection, as I have done, that it is not currently housed within a habitat commensurate to its status. This is something that the committee have placed great emphasis on, particularly as it was central to Borough's wishes. Again, it is consistent with our national strategy, which aims to improve and ensure the long-term sustainability of collections through care and preservation. I'm aware, as I'm sure some will argue, that there are also risks to care and preservation posed by the prospect of international travel and transportation of artworks. And the Bill Committee's meticulous report, for which they deserve our wholehearted thanks, has had to balance these criticisms against the benefits that could be achieved by increasing access to the collection and raising the funds to support the restoration of the building. The Scottish Government thanks the committee for their deliberations and supports its recommendation that the bill proceed.
Many thanks. I now call on Gordon MacDonald. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Borough Collection is a fantastic asset for the City of Glasgow, but one that I believe has been neglected. When the gallery first opened in 1983, there were over 1 million visitors, but this had halved by 1987 as the public's pent-up curiosity for a collection that had lain in storage for so long was satisfied. Visitors' numbers have steadily declined over the last 30 years and are now less than 250,000. The drop-off in numbers was inevitable once the initial curiosity had worn off, but the ongoing decline is due to a number of factors. The leaking roof has been an ever-present problem virtually since it opened and has meant that it has remained a 3-star visitor attraction. As one visitor stated in the feedback form, this place looks tired and unloved. There has been little in the way of rotation of the collection, and of the 9,000 pieces, less than a quarter has been seen by the public. This might be because there is no dedicated team of conservators for the collection, and as a result, problems are allowed to develop, resulting in the gallery posting a notice that moth has been a big problem recently and vulnerable objects have been removed. There has also been a lack of promotion of the collection, with Glasgow Life stating themselves that the collection is still a bit of a secret both here and abroad. Indeed, the visitors' survey suggested that over 40% of visitors had found out about the gallery from word of mouth. So, the gallery needs to be totally refurbished and a permanent solution found to the roof problem. In order for this work to take place, the collection will have to be removed. Therefore, the question is, should it be in storage or allowed to tour to raise publicity about Sir William Burrell's legacy to Glasgow? The Willen Agreement has always allowed the collection to be loaned within the UK, and Glasgow City Council has a record of being a responsible lender. The evidence received by the committee on balance suggested that the transportation of works of art, etc., had improved substantially since the collection was gifted. In addition, Glasgow Life told the committee that, apart from the one-off tour, the possibilities of doing another major tour in our lifetime are not very high. Regarding the delicate items, the committee was assured that the lending code offers a sufficient safeguard and that loans will be granted on a case-by-case basis, with conservation at the forefront of the decision-making. Now, the promoters of the bill have estimated that the museum will need to close for 4 years and will cost in the region of £45 million to refurbish. They hope that a third of this amount will be raised via the tour, either in the form of donations or sponsorship. However, it was also highlighted in other evidence that this amount would be unlikely to be raised. This is borne out by the refurbishment of the Kelvin Grove Gallery, where the £28 million cost was largely borne by the Heritage Lottery Fund, European Regional Fund and the Council themselves, with only £2.5 million from private sponsorship. With that in mind, I refer to paragraph 91 of the Stage 1 report, which states, "The committee places a great deal of emphasis on the restoration of the building housing the Borough collection, particularly since it was so central to Borough's wishes and to his agreement with the City Council. In recommending this bill be passed, we place our trust in the promoter to ensure that the refurbishment takes place, and would consider any failure to do so as a betrayal of that trust. I believe the main benefit from touring the collection abroad in a limited number of places is that it will raise the profile of the collection during the period the gallery is closed. When the refurbishment is complete, I believe the tour will have stirred the public interest once again in this unique collection. When the new gallery opens around 2020, it will bring an economic benefit to Glasgow as visitors once again flock to see it. And who knows, maybe it will once again hit 1 million visitors a year.
Many thanks. I now call Mark Griffin. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by thanking all those who have made a contribution to our consideration so far, and to the convener who's helped with the smooth running of the committee and with a consensual approach to the proposal. The Borough collection is a large collection of art and artefacts, although you don't quite appreciate just how large it is at the Borough collection until you actually go down and look at the art stores and see the sheer volume of items which aren't on display. That collection was gifted to the City of Glasgow Corporation by Sir William Burrell in 1944, and additional items were added to the collection by the Sir William Burrell Trust, which was established by Sir William's will when he died in 1958. The Borough collection is housed in the custom-designed building in Pollock Country Park. Now, as a result of a poorly designed roof, members of staff are constantly moving exhibitions to protect them from water damage. Exhibition space is closed to the public, restricting the space available to display items, and as we've heard, the tarpaulins, which have been engineered into a giant funnel to focus water into a big green wheelie bin, don't really add to the atmosphere and detract from a lot of the marvellous pieces of art that are on display. Now, water continues to leak through the roof as the source of the leak or multiple leaks can't be identified, and after the water penetrates the roof, it's absorbed by a layer of insulation which sits underneath until it's saturated, and then the water leaks out at random points, threatening items in the collection all around the museum. And staff, rather than focusing on what I think should be the core purpose of speaking to visitors and members of the public about the items on display, are more focused on looking for water flowing down the walls and impacting on the pieces of art on display. Experts have also told us that preserving the temperature and humidity of the building is of utmost importance, and as an engineer I can understand how difficult that must be to keep a building at a set temperature and set humidity when effectively you have a massive wet sponge in the loft. Now, against that backdrop, we have the urgent need for renovation, which the bill would allow by encouraging a lending for an international tour to raise those funds. The estimated cost of renovation is £45 million, and the tour it's hoped to contribute £15 million towards that. Now, I don't think the committee were quite persuaded that £15 million could be raised, but that's a matter for Glasgow Life to balance their books. I think the tour could have other spin-off benefits, such as increased accessibility and awareness of the collection. As was pointed out by Gordon MacDonald, visitor numbers have fallen from a peak at the opening of the building of 1 million down to under a quarter of that. And an international tour could increase that awareness abroad, but it also could make us at home more aware of just what we're missing and encourage more local visitors. The key issue in all this is if we felt it was appropriate for us to alter the will of someone who's no longer here. And it's clear that Sir William had no issue with his collection being loaned at all. Our main concern is whether he was content for it to be loaned overseas. Now, the practice of transporting art is much changed since Sir William's time, and as been pointed out, the main concern is actually packing and unpacking at the point of collection and delivery. I think it's It's no more dangerous for a piece of art to go on an international tour rather than travelling across Britain as it is for ourselves to travel by car across Britain, as it would be to travel abroad by plane. And, Presiding Officer, I'll leave it there and say that I think it would be impossible for us to second-guess the motives for Sir William's stipulation in the will, but given the requirement to carry out the essential renovation works and the probable reasons for Sir William writing the will he did, I support the committee's recommendation that consideration of the Borough Collection Bill move to the next stage. Thank you.
Many thanks. And the next stage is to call on the Cabinet Secretary to wind up the debate on behalf of the Government. Please, Cabinet Secretary, 4 minutes.
Presiding Officer, scrutiny of private bills are an important but often unrecognised function of this Parliament, and I would like to thank the committee for their work. As it did during evidence sessions in the committee meetings, the discussion has focused on two key issues: the judgment to overturn the wishes of Sir William Burrell and the risks and opportunities of allowing a collection, particularly one which contains so many fragile items, to be transported across the world. The committee has been satisfied that the evidence has shown that Sir William Burrell was not a possessive collector and instead would have welcomed the opportunity to show his collection to as wide an audience as possible. However, he was concerned about the risks of transporting artworks internationally. We've heard that this is still a consideration for Glasgow City Council and Glasgow Life as custodians of the collection today, as presumably it is for any institution engaged in international lending. However, we've also heard that by introducing a strict lending code and by adhering to the highest standards of conservation and care, these risks, while never completely eliminated, can be minimised and mitigated. So the question then becomes, should these risks be enough to stop the collection being accessed by a whole new international audience and to hinder efforts to raise funds for the restoration of the Borough Collection building, which in itself poses a threat to the collection's long-term preservation? For the committee, this latter point has been central to their consideration of the bill, and this government has seen for itself from projects like the refurbishment of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery and the National Museum of Scotland what can be achieved by investing in our cultural institutions and bringing our museums up to date for the 21st century. It results in soaring visitor numbers and increased customer satisfaction. Glasgow City Council has also shown initiative in this respect and has, over the past decade, been dedicated to ensuring that its cultural establishments are of a high quality. They have invested heavily in capital projects like the Kelvin Grove Museum refurbishment and the new Riverside Transport Museum, and I'm sure you'll agree have reaped the rewards. Given its significance, it seems only logical that the Borough Collection should be next. Unfortunately, we all have to accept that financially times are tight, and faced with a building which isn't fulfilling its function, Glasgow Life have had to think carefully about where the money would come from to secure its long-term future. They have decided that the ability to tour the Borough Collection internationally would help to raise its profile and these much-needed resources, while offering the chance for more people to see and appreciate what the Borough Collection has to offer. I think one of our responsibilities in looking after our heritage, in making sure in terms of stewardship of museums, whether at a local level or indeed a national level, is to make sure that we carry out those functions in a diligent way, but one that is fit for purpose in the 21st century. I think in the scrutiny of the bill and allowing it to proceed to the next stage, I think the Parliament will be taking the right step in supporting the recommendations of the committee. But we always must be vigilant and dutiful in making sure that our artefacts and our heritage and our art have custodians that will look at all the different options in a way that is sensitive but also provides access and due recognition to the collections as they were first formed, but also to make sure that in this new century that we do so in a way that's appropriate for this century.
Many thanks. I now call on Jackson Carlaw to wind up the debate on behalf of the committee. Mr Carlaw, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too remember when that extraordinary building opened in Pollok Park, a gift to the city and people of Glasgow from the Stirling Maxwell family, a lung, if you like, in the second city of the Empire. This magnificent red sandstone and glass and steel construction. And I very much welcome the opportunity to have the tour and to go into the bowels of the Borough Collection to see all these thousands of exhibits that have not yet seen the light of day. Some of them, I have to say, may be less fascinating than others. Sir William did have an extensive collection of Tudor beds. Now, I don't know whether if we brought all the Tudor beds up and we lined them all out, that it would draw the public in from across the world to see, but they looked somewhat less than fascinating to me. But in addition to the Tudor beds, a terrific array of art that has never yet seen its place in the presentation of the collection. Because what I think people sometimes forget is not just the range and size of Sir William's collection, but whether it was a Chinese vase, whether it was a Degas pastel, whether it was a Flemish tapestry, whether it was a Renaissance bit of silver, he collected only the very, very best. And in that borough collection, Glasgow and Scotland have a priceless jewel of art which reaches across everything that you could imagine. Now, the building is in a terrible state. As Mark Griffin and others have said, if you can imagine between the ceiling and the roof a giant sponge which is now waterlogged, which means that the leaks can manifest anywhere in the building, but not necessarily where they've manifested in the roof above the sponge. And so we were persuaded, having first thought perhaps this was a renovation that could be phased, that it wasn't. It was a renovation that would have to be undertaken with the museum closing in the interim. And so then we had to decide, well, is the proposition of the promoter to put the collection on tour appropriate? Could it somehow be put in the local church hall or something like that in the interim? Well, of course, modern standards of presentation and also of ensuring the any collection is secure, temperature-wise, and in every other sense, mean that that is not a possibility, just to sort of shove it into the room next door. So it then came down to whether or not we as a committee felt, and this was a very, very serious proposition, that we should set aside the will of Sir William. And it was mentioned that both Edinburgh and London had argued for the collection in the first place. Well, if they'd known they were going to be able to set aside all the conditions of the collection when they did so, they might have bid that much harder. So setting aside the terms of a will were something we agonised over in some detail. But we did come to this point, and we took legal advice on it. For how long from the point that a collection is gifted must the terms of a will prevail? Can it prevail in perpetuity? Is that reasonable? The circumstances do change. And I think we feel after 50 years, and given everything that we heard about the way in which art is now exported abroad and the security that is attached to that and the way that people can be reasonable. I mean, the most dangerous period for art is really not when it's in a plane being shifted across to some far country. It turns out it's when the porters remove it in the first place to put it in the box. They are very likely to drop it. And that is where some sensational failures have occurred. So we were persuaded that this is the right thing to do, to give this fantastic collection an opportunity to be seen in a one-off tour around the world, promoting Glasgow, promoting Scotland, promoting the collection itself, hopefully bringing visitors to Scotland in the future who will see it and promote it. So I too thank the clerks. I thank everybody who gave evidence. I think for Joan McAlpine and I, we never expect to work on a committee of this Parliament for so long as we are here in the future as collegially as we did and managed to do during the course of these proceedings. And I ask the Parliament to support the motion at decision time tonight.
Many thanks. And that concludes the debate on the Borough Collection, Lending and Borrowing Scotland Bill. And it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 8326 in the name of Aileen Campbell on the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And Minister, if you are ready, I would invite you to speak for 13 minutes and move the motion when you are ready.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to open this debate on the general principles of the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. I want to also welcome Forrester High School and St Augustine's High School, who have a beautiful photography and photographic display in Parliament to mark yesterday's Universal Children's Day. I think it's very apt to note that, given today's debate. I also want to thank everyone who has contributed to developing the bill so far, not least the members of the Education and Culture Committee for their work and their comprehensive Stage 1 report, as well as the Local Government and Regeneration and Finance Committees for their consideration of aspects of the bill. I also want to thank everyone who commented on the bill, especially the 2,400 children and young people and the 1,500 parents who provided their views. A range of opinions have been expressed, many have been constructive and probing, and that can only ensure that such a landmark bill will be examined, improved and ultimately have the profound positive impact on our children and young people that we all want it to have. Today, though, is an opportunity to take an overview of what we as a Parliament wish this bill to achieve, and I want to start by discussing the principles that lie not just at the heart of this legislation, but our approach to improving the lives of children and young people. This bill rests on 5 simple principles. First, the bill declares our collective commitment to making Scotland the best place in the world to grow up. It will establish in statute our shared responsibility for ensuring that our children have the best start in life and access to what they need to succeed as they grow and develop. Through its focus on what has been tried and what we know works in our Getting It Right for Every Child approach, it builds on a renowned Scottish tradition of putting children at the centre of services and ensuring their rights are upheld. Next year is the 50th anniversary of the Kilbrandon Report, which sets the foundation for our children's hearing system. And I can think of no more fitting way of commemorating than passing a bill that so thoroughly embodies the principles of Kilbrandon. Second, that shared responsibility should be achieved by working with parents and carers to provide the caring, supportive environments our children should have. The bill aims to make public services more responsive to needs and sensitive to working with families. Our children certainly deserve nothing less. This requires a change in culture, systems and practice. The framework for that change is GIRFEC, and it has been repeatedly endorsed by this Parliament, most recently in September. GIRFEC has been tested, it works. As the committee saw in its evidence, the benefits to children and families are clear in those parts of Scotland furthest along in its implementation. As Bernardo said in its submission to the committee, we welcome the proposals to put elements of GIRFEC into law. GIRFEC has been a great success where it has been fully implemented, and it is right that the bill should seek to secure its wider adoption. The third principle in the bill is acknowledging that we must continue to improve how we support our most vulnerable children and young people. The challenge set for us all by the report of the Education and Culture Committee on its inquiry about taking children into care is one that none of this chamber takes lightly. The bill rises to that challenge by making it easier for children who need to be looked after to stay in their families through the kinship care order, by extending the support available to care leavers, and by making sure that the wider public sector understands our shared corporate duty for those who have been in care. Moreover, the bill recognises that for some children, we need to respond more quickly to the terrible risk of abuse and neglect. We're all familiar with the tragic stories in the media of children who were below the radar, for whom signals were not picked up or acted on, where the need to act would only have been apparent to someone with access to all the relevant information which was spread amongst a number of different organisations. And as I said on the 25th of September, the recent tragic case of Daniel Pelka highlights the importance of professionals putting the child's interests at the heart of what they do and communicating their concerns. We can never prevent every case of abuse and neglect, but our bill will ensure our services are better placed to identify and act on any concern before they too become tragedies. The fourth principle is the very simple idea that services support our children and young people are better where they are planned jointly. That idea underpins our proposals for joint planning of services by local authorities and health boards. Equally well planted in the planning we expect around individual children who need additional support from services. We do not need scores of uncoordinated plans across different services and professionals. Children need services that work together with each other and work together with their families. Lastly, on that point, yes.
MacArthur.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. In trying to link the first and her fourth principle, would she perhaps give an undertaking to ensure that in the development of those children's plans, children themselves and their families are as closely involved in that process as they can be?
Minister?
Absolutely, they need to be fully involved in the planning, and that's the ethos behind the GIRFEC as well, is about making sure that children and families are respected. Now, lastly, this is a bill watermarked with the principle of early intervention. Early intervention has been a mantra for years. We all know the benefits to children and families of providing support as soon as problems arise, and to services whose resources are increasingly stretched. The bill makes real that recognition of the value of early intervention in our aspirations for early learning and childcare. The benefits of investing in the early years are known where quality services are provided, and we must ensure that these services meet the needs and wishes of families. With the resources and powers we have now, we have made a start on transforming childcare. We want to match the very best in Europe, and as a step towards that, this bill gives 3- and 4-year-olds 600 hours of free nursery education. That's an increase of almost half from the 412.5 hours we inherited, and we're extending this to the most vulnerable 2-year-olds. In total, that's around 120,000 children receiving more childcare, more nursery education and a better start in life, and saving families the equivalent to £707 per year per child. Now, these are the principles that... OK, on that point.
Liz Smith.
I'm grateful to the Minister and also for the additional spending on that front. Could I ask how the Scottish Government will respond to the criticism be levelled by Reform Scotland about some of the difficulties in when the child's birthday falls?
And I will touch on some of that as I go through the rest of my remarks, but certainly this is a huge step forward for children and families, delivering a tangible increase in the hours of early learning and childcare, and also benefiting families by protecting their budgets, by enabling them to have a saving of the equivalent to £707 per year per child. And I think that should be recognised as a first step forward, and we can look at what Reform Scotland have said, and that will contribute to the debate, the wider debate that we have to have in this country about how we want to transform childcare. Now, these are the principles that steer our proposals, and I'm pleased to note that in its report the committee agrees that the bill's principles are sound and that the bill will set our country on the path towards becoming the best place in the world to grow up. A Scotland that takes active and shared responsibility for the well-being of our children and young people, a Scotland that recognises the continuing challenges and is never complacent, an ambition that I believe this chamber shares. Now, we've listened carefully to all that has been said throughout this process, taking full account of all interests and perspectives on how to improve the delivery of services for all children and young people, ensure their rights are respected across the public sector. Of course, there has not been agreement over all the detail of the bill, and throughout the process, we have welcomed constructive discussion, and in that spirit of positive debate, I now want to address some of the issues that have been raised. Turning first to the children's rights provision, I note the committee's view that incorporation of the UNCRC into Scots law does not represent the best way to progress the rights agenda at this time, and that's our view as well. The whole premise of the bill is to make a practical difference in children's lives, and we believe that the balance that we have struck in the bill achieves that. We agree with Ken Norrie when he said that to incorporate the Convention into the domestic legal system of Scotland would be bad policy, bad practice and bad law. We recognise that the committee feels there is scope for the current ministerial duties to be strengthened. Our view is that the proposed package of legal measures already represents a major and significant step forward, but we remain open to suggestions regarding the strengthening of those provisions. Turning to the new powers available to the Children's Commissioner, we welcome the committee's comments on the proposed changes. We recognise that the new investigatory function will undoubtedly have resource implications for the Commissioner. The financial memorandum suggests a staffing structure to support those new functions. However, such staffing and governance issues are entirely a matter for the Parliament. Indeed, the Commissioner's ability to operate entirely independently from government is one of its key strengths. Nevertheless, we will remain willing to support the Commissioner and the Parliament in considering some of the practicalities associated with the changes being proposed. Now, I want to turn my comments onto the role of the named person. I'm pleased that the committee's report has endorsed the value of this role and share my determination to see GIRFEC implemented consistently and effectively throughout Scotland. I note the committee's comments about areas where the practical implementation of GIRFEC needs further clarification and further support from the Scottish Government. Many of the questions raised by the report are those which we will seek to clarify, in many cases by guidance. On the issues of resource, we have set out our estimate of costs in the financial memorandum, but recognise that these will need to be monitored as implementation goes forward, and we will reflect further on how best such monitoring can take place. We also note that the committee on... Yes, of course.
The Royal College in Nursing have said quite clearly that the Scottish Government must recognise the Education Committee's concerns regarding the capacity of the health visiting workforce to deliver existing duties, let alone those associated with the named person role. The health visitors, the people on the ground, believe there needs to be 450 additional health visitors. Does the Minister recognise those concerns, and will the Minister give a commitment to increasing the number of health visitors?
Minister.
We recognise very deeply, very strongly the important role that health visitors have in the early years of a child's life, and we have a very healthy proportion of health visitors to those that they work with in comparison to other parts of the UK, and I have made a commitment in what I've said about making sure that we can monitor implementation as it goes forward. We also note what the committee and some stakeholders have said about information sharing. Now, I believe we all recognise why information sharing is a critical and difficult area. Every inquiry into a child's death in the UK over the last decades has echoed the same crucial finding, that effective sharing of information within and between agencies is fundamental to improving the protection of children and young people. And we have seen this too often to risk it happening again. Proportionate, appropriate and timely information sharing is essential to ensuring our children are kept safe from harm. On our early learning and childcare proposals, we are also delighted that many organisations invited to the committee welcomed our focus on quality alongside increasing hours and flexibility. This is the first time that flexibility and choice have been put on a statutory footing, and that local authorities will be required to consult with local populations of parents to identify their needs. The bill also introduces a new concept of early learning and childcare, replacing the traditional concept of preschool education and recognising that the learning journey begins from birth. It sets the stage for our longer-term aim to develop high-quality, flexible early learning and childcare that is accessible and affordable for all children, parents and families. But we know a number of organisations would like us to go further, especially in relation to additional vulnerable twos. Research shows that what makes a difference to those children is high-quality provision, and we will not compromise on quality in order to make sure we improve the outcomes for our children. And of course, I have dealt with some of the issues that Liz Smith raised in relation to Reform Scotland's publication today, and I look forward to continuing that debate on with them. Now, I want to discuss the bill's provision for looked after children.
In 15 seconds, please. We're extraordinarily tight for time today.
The Kinship Care Order recognises that the extended family has a responsibility to help when children are at risk and ensure that when kinship carers step into that parenting role, they receive the support they need. That is a huge step forward. Previously, any support provided to that group of carers was provided by local authorities on a discretionary basis only. The Kinship Care Order will empower families and provide each child with a safe, stable, loving and nurturing home, and will help some children avoid formal care if that is not in their best interest. We also have very, very strong commitments to ensuring that we get things right for our looked after children who are moving on to independent living. And I think the engagement that we've had with Who Cares and others around that can ensure that we get things right within the final drafting of this bill and make sure that this is a bill that works for our looked after children. So, Presiding Officer, I have set out the principles of this bill. These principles represent the highest level of ambition for our children and young people, so it's not surprising the bill does cover an awful lot of ground. But I do sincerely look forward to hearing the views of other members and the rest of the committee as we work together to ensure that this bill works for Scotland's children.
Many thanks. And we are extraordinarily tight for time today, and I'd invite members to speak up to their allocated time or less in order to allow as many people into the debate as possible. Now, Colin Stewart. Maxwell, please, up to 9 minutes. Please, Mr Maxwell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am, of course, today speaking as convener of the committee. As the Minister said, the bill contains a wide range of proposals across 13 parts. Consequently, we took a large amount of oral evidence and considered over 180 written submissions. The input of all those organisations and individuals who submitted views to us has been essential, and we thank everyone who contributed. I would also like to thank the committee clerks for all their hard work, my committee colleagues for their efforts in scrutinising the bill, and to our SPICE researcher for assisting us. The Education and Culture Committee has spent significant time this session examining issues linked to child welfare, specifically the educational attainment of looked after children and decision-making on whether to take children into care. It is clear from our inquiries that much more is needed to improve outcomes for disadvantaged and looked after children. This work has helped inform our scrutiny of the bill, and we support its central aim of promoting early intervention and preventative action to give children the best possible start in life. A number of areas received particular comment in the evidence, which is reflected in our report. Now, I can't cover everything in time available, so I'll focus on 5 areas: the provisions relating to children's rights, named persons, information sharing, extension of early learning and childcare, and aftercare for young care leavers. Now, Part 1 of the bill relates to the rights of children. Many children's organisations supported the full incorporation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. They considered that this was the best way to embed children's rights into the culture of our society, to enhance respect for our children and to send a clear message about how we value them. Whilst these are indeed laudable outcomes, the committee was unanimous in its view that the case had not been made for full incorporation of the Convention. Our main difficulty is that it was not always clear what practical improvements such a move would have for children and their families. Our view is that whilst the outcomes arising from incorporation are important, it does not necessarily follow that incorporation is the best or indeed the only way in which to achieve them. Also, the Convention is implemented in Scotland in a number of ways already, such as under our obligations in the Scotland Act. Although we are not persuaded by the argument for full incorporation, we agree that the duties on Scottish ministers and public authorities should be strengthened. For example, ministers must report every 3 years on what they have done to further the Convention. But we do want the bill to go further and so have also called for ministers to set out their vision on what they are going to do for each 3-year period. We have also asked the Government to explain why it has chosen to require public authorities to report on the steps they have taken to secure better or further effect of the Convention and not to require them to act on those findings. The second area I want to focus on is the introduction of the named person for every child and young person up to the age of 18. Now, at the outset, I should of course acknowledge that one member, Liz Smith, did not agree with the inclusion of this proposal in the bill, but it was supported by the rest of the committee. Now, the named person proposal forms part of the wider policy of getting it right for every child, or GIRFEC. And as members will be aware, the proposal to introduce the named person has received considerable comment. Now, some of the most compelling evidence we received was from Highland Council, which is seen very much as a trailblazer for GIRFEC. It told us that the named person role was developed through practice and experience and was based on what families and professionals wanted. The initiative has been fully implemented since 2010 and the results are encouraging. Families like having contact with someone they know and who knows the child, and they don't have to deal with bureaucratic systems to get some extra support. Professionals too have welcomed it. Teachers, health visitors and midwives feel that the named person role has not changed what they do, but it has made them feel empowered. We also heard evidence from health and teaching professionals that the named person role could lead to a reduction in neglect. According to Highland, the introduction of the named person meant children were more likely to get the help they needed when they needed it, and fewer children were referred to the children's reporter. However, the committee is mindful that some of this improvement is in part due to the culture of integration and collaborative working across frontline services in Highlands. As we have said in our report, we want the Scottish Government to provide details of the range of support it will provide to ensure local authorities and health boards are able to replicate the successes experienced in Highland, recognising the different circumstances that will prevail in different parts of the country. We also highlighted a number of practical issues that need to be resolved, such as what types of intervention a named person will be expected to make, and how the role will operate during school holidays. We believe the success of the named person role will depend on the Government's ability to work with its local partners to clarify these and other issues. The Scottish Government must also be prepared to ensure health boards, especially health visitors, can cope with the demands placed upon them. This was raised with us by the Finance Committee, and we have asked the Government to explain how capacity issues will be managed to ensure that the good intentions of the bill can be put into place. Linked to the introduction of the named person is the proposal to lower the threshold for sharing information about individual children or young people without consent. The bill will allow professionals to share information where there is a concern about the well-being of a child, rather than only where, as the current test requires, there is a risk of significant harm. Now, it is absolutely crucial that all those who share information are properly trained. Training and guidance must cover all relevant service providers, including the private and third sectors, and must engender a common understanding of what constitutes proportionate, necessary information sharing. We also refer in our report to the concerns raised by witnesses about the drafting of the information sharing provisions in the bill. For example, as the Minister will be aware, Professor Norrie described the provisions as contradictory, while the Information Commissioner's Office felt that the scope of Section 27 was too wide and wanted it to be redrawn. We therefore welcome the Minister's commitment to look again at the drafting of these important provisions, and I know that the Government will carefully consider our comments and others before we approach stage 2. The bill will also extend the number of free hours of preschool early learning and childcare to which children are entitled, from 475 to 600 hours per year. This is indeed a positive step and reflects the crucial importance of early years intervention in children's development. We also very much welcome the plan to introduce increased flexibility in the provision of the new entitlement, which will make it easier for parents to take up employment opportunities. However, we do urge the Scottish Government and COSLA to work to ensure that flexible arrangements are made available as quickly as possible to enable families to take advantage of this new provision. Finally, Presiding Officer, I want to touch on the important proposals to extend support for young care leavers up to the age of 26. Currently, local authorities must provide support up to the age of 18 and have discretion for those up to the age of 21. As we heard during our previous inquiries, young care leavers are particularly vulnerable. We must do all we can to ensure they receive adequate and appropriate support so that they can enjoy exactly the same outcomes in life that many of us take for granted. We recognise the difficulty of that, but we also recognise that the transition from being in care to independent living can often be an extremely difficult time in a young person's life. And so we support the Bill's proposals, but invite the Government to respond to the 3 questions asked at paragraph 178 of our report. And the Minister, of course, referred to this earlier in her comments about the campaign led by Who Cares Scotland. I should also mention that the committee will take evidence in relation to school closures before stage 2. The Government intends to lodge amendments in this area, and we want to hear from stakeholders in order to inform our scrutiny of these amendments. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the committee supports the aims of the bill to put children and young people at the heart of planning and delivery of services and to ensure their rights are respected throughout society. We welcome the Scottish Government's aim of improving outcomes for children and young people, particularly those who are disadvantaged. With the exception of the named person provisions, the whole committee agreed with the general principles of the bill, and we hope our suggestions for improvement will help to make the bill stronger still. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Jane Baxter. 9 minutes, please. Up to.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased that we've finally reached the Stage 1 consideration of the Children and Young People's Bill. As we're all aware, this is a substantial piece of legislation, not surprising given its origins as 2 separate bills. So with that in mind, I do not propose to explore in detail today all the points which we will hope to cover during the later stages of this bill. Labour will support the Government and vote for this bill at decision time tonight. We will go into stage 2 in a constructive and positive frame of mind, testing those elements of the bill which concern us and looking to enhance and improve the bill in other areas where we feel it's simply not ambitious enough for Scotland's children. When considering our proposed amendments, we will focus on early learning and childcare, which my colleague Neil Bibby will address in his closing contribution, and the issues surrounding care leavers, which I know my colleague Kezia Dugdale will focus on in her speech. The potential for this legislation to make a real impact for Scotland's children should not be underestimated. Everyone in this chamber is ambitious for Scotland, and it is through improving the life chances of our young people that we can do that. And that's why I'm so pleased that Labour's newest MSP, Cara Hilton, will be making her maiden speech in this debate, and I hope the chamber will join with me in welcoming her. Too many children's life chances are determined by the circumstances into which they are born and grow up, not by their own unique potential to achieve, develop and thrive. Access to opportunities for too many children and young people is bound up in a tangled web of poverty-related issues which impact on their health, their home life, their interaction with their peers and their educational attainment. The key to this bill achieving its own full potential will be if it can make inroads into those issues, many of which are deeply rooted in our communities. And there are some headline-grabbing figures in this bill. Scottish Labour welcomes the increase in statutory provision of free early learning and childcare, even though it's been a long time coming, as it was an SNP manifesto commitment in 2007. But there's a danger in bringing forward this legislation that there's too much focus on the headlines at the expense of working through the details of how the measures will be achieved. An increase in free early learning and childcare does sound excellent, but unless those hours can support the childcare needs of the parents and guardians using the service, it may not have the impact that many of them are looking for. Yep.
Minister.
That this bill is putting flexibility on a statutory footing as well to ensure that it does work for the parents and carers that Jane Baxter describes.
Baxter.
Thanks to the Minister. I'll touch on that as I proceed through my comments. Early in the year, I was privileged to speak at the launch of a report produced by Fife Gingerbread and the Poverty Alliance on the impact on families of being a lone parent in a rural area. That report along with feedback from the many conversations with parents supported by Save the Children, have highlighted how important flexibility of childcare provision is to many parents who are either in work or trying their hardest to get work. And at the moment, I remain concerned that the proposals as they stand do not address this point in the short term, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister in the future as to whether increased flexibility in the early learning and childcare provision, and indeed out-of-school childcare, could be incorporated into the bill. The point has been made at committee that we need to have a clearer understanding of how this bill fits in with other legislation aimed at planning services for children and young people. I made reference earlier to the value of framing the measures in the bill in the context of how poverty can be tackled, and we will examine the extent to which the proposals in the bill fit with or support the Scottish Child Poverty Strategy. One example would be to extend early years provision to include 2 in poverty, as has been recommended by so many children's charities. We will also be seeking for the bill to be amended so that all 3-year-olds receive the same entitlement, regardless of where their birthday falls in the school year. For many parents, and has been commented on by Reform Scotland today, those few months could make an enormous difference. But much of the controversy surrounding the bill so far has been around the named person provisions. If we cast our mind back to the Conservative Party business on this matter just a few weeks ago, we will be aware of the many concerns which are raised on this point. But we are minded to support the principle of the named person, just as we are supportive in principle of the Children and Young People's Bill in its entirety. But I return again to the comments I made during the previous debate that this is a nugget of a good idea, but we need to make sure it can work well and be effective. I want the positive outcomes experienced in Highland to be replicated across the country, but the devil will be in the detail. Yeah.
Secretary.
The member makes a very wise point about making sure that it is implemented well. I would commend to the member, and I'm sure she will wish to do this, visiting, for example, Angus Council, or visiting some of the excellent work that's being done in my own constituency in our Gallant Butte Council, and seeing how this is being converted into practice in a most impressive way. And I think that will set our mind at rest that imagination and hard work and resource is managing to do that.
Well, I would agree that resources are going to be fundamental to making this work. And I would also just like to reiterate that I think it is important that every place is different, and what works in Highland may not work in other places. So we need to take time and look at individual circumstances and individual communities and work out what works for each place. So it's not just as simple as saying it's going to be like that. It will take a bit of time, a bit of imagination, a bit of commitment to make it work in every area. The training and support necessary for effective implementation of the role of the named person must be appropriately resourced, and I hope the roll call of concerns in the committee report is considered carefully. Both RCN Scotland and the EIS in their evidence have highlighted these in relation to funding and support. Further clarification of the role of the named person needs to be established by the Scottish Government, because, Minister, while we support the principle of what you're trying to achieve, we will continue to push to ensure that the proposals are fit for purpose. And I think that the volume of comment and debate surrounding this topic is an indicator of Scotland's wish to do better for vulnerable children, and it's a desire to ensure that we get it right. We have a golden opportunity to do so, and we must be able to say with confidence to parents, children and practitioners that the wholesale adoption of the named person model is going to promote a step change in how services are delivered to children and their families. And with this in mind, the Government must also address the concerns of kinship carers. I and my Labour colleague on the Education Committee have offered cautious support at the report stage, but we will consider carefully, with a view to bringing forward an amendment to provide greater clarity on the proposals within the primary legislation itself, rather than wait for the detail on kinship care orders in secondary legislation. I am pleased to have heard the Minister reflecting upon the publication of Together's report on the state of children's rights in Scotland. I was keen to read the assessment of where we are now on the implementation of the UNCRC, but the report makes a fairly brutal judgment on the bill, stating it lacks a coherent child rights framework through which the Scottish Government's policy intention to make rights real can be achieved. There are clearly improvements which could be made in this area of the bill, and I support looking towards the duty as adopted in Wales of having due regard to the UNCRC when making policy decisions. Our Welsh colleagues also require ministers to produce reports, and I hope the Minister will reflect on the committee's recommendations in this regard. In supporting this bill in principle, we will aim to be as constructive as possible in our comments and reflect the huge amount of evidence and information which has been shared with us from the children and young people and care sectors across the country. We are lucky to be able to work with such a range of organisations who have such knowledge, skills and genuine commitment to improving young Scots' lives, and I'd like to thank them all for their hard work. In closing, I look forward to listening to the rest of the debate today and working with colleagues in the future to improve the bill before us. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Liz Smith. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Deputy Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has made it very clear in its introduction to the bill that the primary function is to ensure that there is a much more collaborative and integrated approach to the provision of children's services in Scotland, so that all young people can access the opportunities and the support that they need. And given that the better outcomes for young people that have been achieved by those service providers who have engaged in that greater collaboration and integrated approach, that is a very reasoned approach for the bill, and one for which I think there is clear cross-party support. Too many young people are losing out, whether they are children with foster families or kinship families, whether they are young carers, children with long-term illnesses who are unable to go to school, or who can't access the full entitlement for nursery provision. And on that last issue, Minister, can I just welcome the opening that you gave us to discuss this further, because I think it is a different issue about when the birthday falls as opposed to the actual monetary provision, and that's something that I think we want to take forward at stage 2. The Chamber knows, Deputy Presiding Officer, that we do have some serious concerns about certain parts of the bill. In some cases, these concerns are substantive. In others, they are administrative and resourcing issues, and sometimes it's a matter of drafting. The legal profession, quite rightly, always asks politicians to be very mindful of what it is that constitutes good law, whether proposals are clear, coherent, effective and accessible, and therefore easily understood. Throughout the early passage of the bill, we've been examining the proposals very much against these criteria and questioned whether it's actually new legislation which is required, or whether there needs to be a change in culture and attitude, or perhaps a mixture of both. But for the large part, the Scottish Government has decided on a legislative route, so let me deal first with some substantive concerns in this respect. Firstly, there has been a move to legislate with primary regard to the child's well-being rather than with primary regard to welfare, which is a term that underpins most of the existing legislation. Now, I can well understand why there is a certain attraction about that, because I think it's generally assumed that well-being has a deeper and much more holistic meaning, which might bring some added qualitative value. However, what I think it has done is to expose the tension between the theory and the practice, and whilst well-being, I think we can all agree, is a good thing, it is actually exceedingly difficult to find, notwithstanding the Shanari indices and indeed their subdivisions which have been operating in some local authorities, because I don't think the bill is entirely clear about the definition of well-being, and it is too often conflated with welfare. And the more that the Scottish Government has tried to make legislative provision for improved children's services, the more it has encountered difficulties with exactly these definitions. Yes, of course.
I think maybe one of the contributors that you had at the committee, I think it was Bernardo's, talked about how the Shanari indicators that go along with wellbeing actually give professionals who work with children a much greater understanding of what they're all talking about, to enable them to work more purposefully with the child to ensure that their wellbeing is being met and that they're able to have positive outcomes in later life.
They do, but the point in the bill is that the terms well-being and welfare are sometimes conflated, and that's a difficulty about how some of the rest of the bill hangs together. So I think we have to take that very carefully. Secondly, there is the issue of inconclusive legal advice, and that's been foremost regarding the issue of whether or not to incorporate UNCRC into Scots law. Now, there's a wide divergence of opinion on this, as I think the Minister indicated in her own speech. And it's very clear that it ranges from bad policy, bad practice and bad law, I think was your comment, round to people who are like Children's Commissioner or some of the children's charities who would say that it's absolutely essential if we are to embed clear and robust means of accountability. Deputy Presiding Officer, I think the divergence with legal opinion is nothing new, but what has made life, I think, quite difficult for the committee is the relative lack of detailed evidence to support the contrary views, and the fact that the evidence which we took on this crucial issue is rather incomplete. The Parliament already knows that the Scottish Conservatives have opposed the section of the bill which proposes the universal provision of a named person for all young people up to age 18. And we've done that for several reasons. I'm not going to go over them again because we held a debate on this issue, but we've been very persuaded by some of the evidence that was presented to the committee, whether that's the SPTC The Faculty of Advocates, the Law Society of Scotland, Govan Law Centre and churches, experienced practitioners like Maggie Millen, they've all made the point that the actual universal provision of a named person clearly undermines the role of some parents and the family and the communities, and instead places professionals in the front line when it comes to responsibility for the child. Now, when that's taken together with some of the proposed extent of data sharing and the extension of powers of Children's Commissioner and, in some cases, to Scottish Government ministers in a way that Kenneth Norrie described as open-ended, it makes the bill a bit too statist in its approach for our liking. And that's why this afternoon we will be abstaining on this because we are not yet satisfied that the bill is dealing with these in a way that would suit. Now, I've heard SNP ministers and backbenchers both claim that local authorities are facing incredibly difficult challenges and different challenges within their respective local authorities. That's absolutely true. And I think we have to be very careful within the bill to acknowledge that and ensure that we're not putting on large structures that really take that away. We've been very careful in our thought about this bill and the vast number of submissions that have come. The rights of children do not stand in isolation. They should be seen in the context of the rights of parents and families and all the communities that they represent. And that is something that we're looking to develop when it comes to stage 2. So we have a lot of sympathy with many of the principles of the bill, but there are still some fundamental issues that we want to tease out at stage 2, and so we will be abstaining later on.
Many thanks. And we now move to open debate. 6-minute speeches, or up to 6-minute speeches. Claire Adamson to be followed by Kezia Dugdale.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's been a great honour, and I've much enjoyed the work that we have been doing in our committee in relation to Children and Young People's Bill. We have taken a significant amount of evidence, both written evidence. Unfortunately, we couldn't see everyone who wanted to appear at committee, but we have taken on board the written evidence that was also given to the committee, and I think it's a testament to how much people want this bill to work and how much the agencies involved want to improve the outcomes for our young people, that so much care and attention has been given to the briefings that we have received as members in relation to this bill. The Pills Policy Memorandum sets out very early on that the fundamental reforms of the children's services in line with the Christie Commission report, which highlighted the importance of early years prevention and personalised service delivery. And I think we should remind ourselves that the Christie report received a significant amount of cross-party support on its publication, and I think it's to be commended that we're moving towards that. But I think sometimes that we maybe need to take stock of what's actually happening in Scotland at the moment. We're not coming from a place of zero in this respect. Both the NHS, colleagues in local authorities and education departments, all of whom have been working very hard to take on board the recommendation of the Christie report and are working towards more collaborative working practices, not only in early years and in children's services, but also in elderly people's services. So there's a great deal of change already going on in the sector. And if I could pause a moment and just highlight on some of the work that is being done in this area, I think the committee is already on record commending our NHS staff, local authority workers, education staff for their dedication and their commitment to their roles. And I would like to highlight a pilot that happened in North Lanarkshire regarding the Roots to Empathy programme. We all know that from the research and what underpins this bill is how important early intervention is, because we know how a child's emotional development can be very badly damaged by poor parenting in the very early years and in early schooling. And the Roots to Empathy programme was piloted in North Lanarkshire in Berry Hill Primary in that area. And it's a Canadian programme that was founded by Mary Gordon, and it's designed to actually improve the emotional capacity of young children and empathise with other people. And it involves a young baby being brought into a primary classroom a structured series of questions and engagement with that baby, game playing, song singing. I shall spare you my rendition of the Baby Reuben song that I heard in Berryhill Primary, much though it was a delight to see both the reaction of the young baby on hearing the children in the class welcoming him with this song. But what this programme has done is very well documented, and the research has shown how much it improves the capacity for empathy in young people. And of course, for many of the young people, this wouldn't have been necessary because they grow up in warm, nurturing homes and with good parental responsibility, the opportunity to engage with other people. But for those children that had been denied that upbringing, the results for them were equally as impressive, both in anger management issues and in reducing the behavioural problems that we sometimes see as a result of the very complex issues which Jane Baxter so eloquently described, the very, very complex nature of the damage that poverty can do for our young people. So I think it's far from as starting from somewhere new with this. There's so much good work going on in Scotland that we should actually recognise that and know that just the dedication and the commitment of the people that are involved in this. Indeed, Roots of Empathy, the Minister on the launch of the rollout across Scotland said it's a commitment to early intervention and the importance of positive relationships as the cornerstone of a better Scotland. This is an investment in the future by encouraging empathy and respecting children, and we are giving them the foundations to be positive, successful adults who will pass those skills on to their own children. And I think this is very important, because what we're doing in this bill and what the committee in its support for the principle of the bills is showing that this is so important for moving forward. And by putting this in statute, we're actually creating a marker that sets Scotland out as one of the foremost countries in its support for young people and their development.
Final minute.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just reminding it's your final minute because we're tight for time.
Sorry, Presiding Officer, thank you. If I could just quickly, I do understand it was a very consensual report from the committee, and I don't need to repeat many of the recommendations and the conclusions that have been given, but the one area in which we differed was named person. But I do think we should consider maybe some of the support for named person that have come from the Royal College of Nursing, who said the named person role is working well in areas where GIRFEC is already being implemented. Children First said it supported the idea of the named person, as we believe it could offer a way to avoid children slipping through the net when they are most vulnerable, and a useful point of contact for families so they can access advice services without having to deal with it. And I think we should really take on board the success of Highland, North Ayrshire and other areas who are working on GIRFEC, rolling out GIRFEC successfully and implementing named person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Kezia Dugdale to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate and do so from the pack, recognising the hard graft that my colleagues Neil Bibby and Jane Baxter have done working through the detail in committee. I want to use the time I've got to talk very specifically about looked after children, and in particular Part 7 and 8 of the bill. Why, Presiding Officer? Well, from everything I've read, everything I've learnt, every story I've heard and person I've met, nothing has angered me more than the experiences and life stories of looked after children. Let's go through some of the key statistics for the benefit of the record. There are 16,200 looked after children today, and that's up 25% from 2006. 30% of them have experienced homelessness, and up to 80% of our prisons' young offenders institutions population have been in care at some point in their lives. That figure has been as high as 88% of Polmont's population when Barnardo's published their Plan B report. You are far more likely to go to jail than you are to go to university if you've been in care. And that's before we even look at the difference in educational attainment between those in care and those beyond it. Such wasted potential somehow now feels inevitable. And whilst reading ahead of today's debate, I followed the footnotes through to the 2007 report in the name of Education Minister Hugh Henry that's called Looked After Children, We Can and We Must Do Better. It's a fantastic report, brimming with statistics and action points to make things better. But I was struck by just how little has changed in the 6 years. And when I put that to Who Cares Scotland earlier today, I was told that there have been 17 different reports on looked after children since the dawn of this Parliament. One care leaver told me that each one somehow reads like an apology for inaction perhaps, but really an apology for what feels like the inevitability of poorer life chances for looked after children. An evidence problem that somehow just seems too big to fix. Now, I'm not interested in a blame game about how we got here, because that care leaver couldn't care less about who's to blame. What she wants to know is what's going to happen now, and she's looking to this bill as a huge opportunity that must not be missed. That's why I've committed myself to bring forward a number of amendments at Stage 2 in conjunction with Barnardo's, Aberlour and Who Cares Scotland. But legislation alone is not enough. What we need is a cultural shift in the public's attitude towards looked after children. And I've got two reflections on that I'd like to make. One, I think the public are largely ignorant about care leavers, how many there are, what looked after at home is and means, how poor their life chances are. Too many people think these are bad kids worthy of little sympathy from anyone other than the biggest softies, rather than fundamentally good kids who find themselves where they are because of a life free from care and full of neglect. Kids who have more experience of violence than affection, more experience of physical contact defined by restraint rather than by love. We need to put those children front and centre of our public discourse, and we can start to do that with this bill.
Sorry, Minister.
Sorry, I entirely agree that we need to make sure that we change the myths that surround looked after children and make sure that they are given the support and nurture that they need. And I guess I would wonder if she would welcome our support for Who Cares' Time to Listen campaign, and wonder if she's signed that pledge. And if not, how can we work together to make sure that more people sign that pledge? Because we do need to listen to these looked after children. These are our responsibility, and we need to make sure in our corporate parenting duties that we ensure that they have no less of a fulfilling life as their non-looked after peers.
I'm delighted to support the Minister with that ambition, and would speak for all of my colleagues in our willingness to work with the Government to improve the life chances of looked after children. I think she can count on that, not just throughout this bill process, but throughout the passage of this Parliament. I'll come on to speak more about that in a second. We need to talk about looked after children more, and we need to challenge the media to do the same. We need to unite as a Parliament and agree that nothing should be inevitable about the life chances of looked after children, except the fulfilling of their potential. These are our children, and we should demand that their lives are full of love and expectation, and in this Parliament we should create the rules by which that might happen. My second reflection is on care leavers themselves. It was put to me that stigma associated from being in care is so strong that when a young person turns 16, they want to rid themselves of that label and everything to do with it. In so doing, they lose their rights to expect support transitioning into adult life. I can understand that, but I'd like to get to the place where young care leavers can wear their label with pride and demand support to enhance their lives. It should be, in many ways, a liberation issue, with care leavers having more rights to support into their adult life exactly because of where they have come from and who they are. That will require a cultural shift in our attitudes to looked after children, but it's also about care leavers themselves demanding and exercising the rights that they have. Every care leaver I've met can name the date that they left care. I can't imagine many people around the room can remember the date that they left their family home. Why? Because leaving home is a process, it's not an event, and I want to see this bill greatly enhanced in that respect. I hope that the Government will engage constructively in this, and I appreciate that we can't change society's attitudes to looked after children overnight, but I hope that by the end of this bill we can have a very clear vision of our ambition for care leavers and a very clear route map for how to get there. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, let me make it absolutely clear I will do everything I can to work with this Government to improve the bill with regards to looked after children, not just throughout this bill but throughout the passage of Parliament, and have a very strong and clear ambition for where we might be in 10 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call George Adam to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We also talk about wanting Scotland to be the best place in the world to grow up, and you know, it's mentioned quite a lot, and I believe that this bill will help us in getting to that ambition, you know, building the foundations for us, ensuring that we can actually do something, whether it's actually one bill, two bills, or whatever it is. It's a very ambitious bill, that is obviously dealing with our most important commodity, which in Scotland is our children and young people. And what we do here will make a massive difference in all these young people's lives. Now, Claire McFarlane's quite right when she says that the charity groups and various other charities are so involved in this and they want it to do extremely well, because that's how important it is, and they appreciate that, and they have engaged with the committee and various other groups throughout the whole scenario. But one of the things that it's interesting to see how the Education Committee got to this stage, because before we actually started debating about or discussing the Children and Young People's Bill, the committee had looked after children and the educational attainment of young people and children, and we went in at length. So we've seen some and heard some of the stories that happened to these young people, and I think that made a big difference. That made a big difference for every one of us in the committee, because it gave us an opportunity, it made it real, brought it into the real world. It was no longer just a bill, a piece of paper that we were discussing. It was actually real people's lives. And I think that's one of the things that, as a committee, every one of us took forward when we went into this process. And I went to visit not so long ago to Polmouth Young Offenders Institute, where Bernardo's are running a project. And I met a lot of young people there who, because of various things that have happened in life, were in that secure unit. But they had part of this programme and they were helping educate younger people who were in the system as well. They were helping, and we started talking about the Children and Young People's Bill. And when we started explaining some of the things that happened in their lives, they started coming round to the idea that that may have been, not in every case, but it might have been a way to actually help them and ensure that they didn't get into that position. Now, I think that's the most important thing we have to take from this, because, we do live in challenging times. We do have young people who have challenging lives, and I think we have to look at that and do what we can for these people. One of the things when I was on that visit was I had instant credibility, presiding officer, because one of my constituents was there, and when I told him I came from Seat Hill in Paisley, he actually thought that was actually extremely... he actually said to one of his colleagues, "George is one of us, so we can listen to him." But I think that's important. We make sure that we can have young people and children, and that's the whole point of the bill, actually at the centre of all the decision-making, empowering them and giving them the opportunity. Now, there's much been said about rights, the UNRC within the actual debate, and I would say, well, GIRFEC, UNRC is actually, the principles of it are part of getting it right for every child. And when you see the great work that is going on in the Highland Council, you can see how it's made a difference. And some of the things that were said when we got evidence from that was the fact that, a lot of the parents with a named person, they actually said the problem was when they didn't actually have the named person. Once everyone understood what the named person did, they actually they wanted to engage when it came to that situation. And this is something I think, coming from my own constituency, I can see it working in an area where there is areas of deprivation and various challenges within the constituency. And I think that's what we're here to do, is to actually get something. Yes, we can discuss over the next kind of stage 2 and stage 3 how we want to develop this further. And I'm glad that the Labour Party have decided to actually work with us on this and move things forward, because I think this is the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning said earlier on in questions, this Parliament's at its best when we look at solving problems like last night's debate, when we look at a way, how can we deal with this issue, and we don't just play the political game. And that's the exciting part for me about this bill, because this bill gives us an opportunity to make a difference in every single young person's life. That's not hyperbole, that's not exaggeration. If we get this right, we can ensure that we don't end up with these young men and young women in places like Polmouth and other places, and also in care. One of the things that we had when I was a councillor at Renfrewshire was there is an issue when the care service, when young people become adults and they move further, they go out to adult life, and it's challenging for us all at the best of lives when we actually go out into the big bad world, because the world isn't an easy place to live in. But one of the things we did while I was a councillor in Renfrewshire was ensure that we had housing with one of the local housing associations, ensuring that we could work with them to make sure that these young people had the support in housing, because one of the problems we often had was that as a social housing provider was that within about 2-year periods of giving a young person their keys of a new home, they were actually probably trying to get evicted from that said home. So I appreciate that we have to find a way to actually look after, but there's other ways of doing it. We don't have to do it under various parts of legislation. We can actually work with other partners and organisations to ensure that we can offer that support. So I think today, presiding officer, in closing, is actually about the vision the idea that we can make Scotland the best place for young people to grow up in. And as long as we all work together and stay focused, we can make that difference.
Thank you very much. I call Liam MacArthur, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Like others, can I add my thanks to the very many people and organisations that have submitted oral and written evidence, and for those responsible for the veritable snowstorm of briefings over the last couple of days. Can I thank the clerks and committee colleagues for their contributions in what I think is a very reasonable report on a very wide-ranging bill. Let me be clear that Scottish Liberal Democrats support the principles of this bill, and we believe that the bill actually delivers on those principles, perhaps distinguishing it from what we saw in relation to the post-16 education bill. Like any piece of legislation, it requires improvement in very many areas. The Finance Committee's report on the financial memorandum was particularly critical, but I welcome the willingness the Minister has shown to address areas of concern pretty much across the board. One area is in relation to rights, and I'm not sure that the bill does properly reflect children's rights yet at this stage. I don't think the committee was, I think, convinced that full incorporation of the UNCRC was a case that had been adequately made, but I think where we were seized was the importance of perhaps looking again at incorporation of specific rights. And I think the Law Society description of the duty placed on ministers, a diluted version of existing obligations, the Faculty of Advocates saying that the bill does not go further to develop the rights of children and young people in Scotland to a significant extent, suggests that there is more work here to be done, and I think in particular in relation to putting child right impact assessments at the heart of the legislative process going forward. One of the areas of most controversy was obviously in relation to the named person. We've had an earlier debate on that in this Parliament, and again I make clear my support for the principle, but acknowledge, as I think all the committee members did, some of the practical and resource issues inherent in this issue. I think some of that draws from the uncertainty around the role, the responsibility, the interaction with lead professional, and indeed some of the training requirements. This in turn has consequences for resources, a point picked up by the Finance Committee, by the Education Unions, and indeed by the RCN, who in their briefing suggested concerns regarding the capacity of the health visiting workforce to deliver existing duties, let alone those associated with the named person role, need to be borne in mind. I think the practicalities stem from the lowering of the threshold to one of well-being, and some of the implications of that in terms of information sharing, and indeed where we seek where the consent of the individual is sought. Kenneth Noddy, the Information Commissioner, and others, I think, have highlighted their concerns in relation to sections 26 and 27, and I'm grateful for the Minister at least acknowledging that and agreeing to take that away. So there are practical and resource issues here. We need to maintain a ruthless focus on the issues of welfare, and I would hope ensure that there's a presumption in favour of consent in relation to information sharing. In terms of the political heart of the bill, I think that is to be found in Part 6 in terms of early learning and childcare. It's a vehicle for the government to deliver its commitment on 600 hours for 3 and 4 years. And again, I restate my welcome for that. I do believe that will deliver real benefits. I think the concerns that have been raised by Liz Smith, Jane Baxter and others in relation to the points made by Reform Scotland, I think have been taken on board by the Minister. But I do think there is scope for more ambition, particularly in relation to 2-year-olds. The Minister will argue that the bill represents a first step, and again, I would not acknowledge that, but I don't think it shows sufficient ambition. Scottish Liberal Democrats have put forward, I think, reasonable and costed proposals for extending that provision to those 2-year-olds from the poorest backgrounds. In their evidence, or in their briefing today, the Save the Children say that to be effective at meeting its aims, we believe there is a strong case to also include 2-year-olds growing up in poverty. Going on to say evidence shows that every month of preschool provision after 2 is linked to improved outcomes, including increased educational performance at age 14. This is something picked up by children in Scotland, who then go on to point out the provision for 40% of 2-year-olds in England, and that is delivering 90 to 92,000 2-year-olds south of the border. I don't really have time. I know you'll pick it up in your wind-up speech. So I think it's achievable. The bill offers a vehicle for delivering that, and I think it can be done without impacting on quality, allowing the flexibility the committee pointed to, and ensuring 2-year-olds from the poorest backgrounds in Scotland don't fall behind those south of the border. Finally, in relation to Part 8 and strengthening the support for care leavers, can I associate myself very much with the comments made by Kezia Dugdale in an excellent speech. This is an area obviously that has been a focus to the committee through at least 2 inquiries inquiries now, and I think the bill does represent a real step in the right direction in terms of aftercare up to the age of 26. But as our inquiries show, I think there is something that needs particularly renewed focus. There's not a silver bullet here. The reasons why those going through the care system struggle in terms of their outcomes are many and varied. But I was very struck by what I thought was an excellent debate last night, where the emphasis was on the need for strong, stable, loving relationships. Well, the message there is very much the message that we got back time and again through those inquiries. And I think there is more that can be done, building on what is, which are good provisions within this bill. There is more that can be done in terms of that aftercare and delivering. I think what Aberlour, Who Cares and Bernardo's have talked about, transforming aftercare into a much stronger form of continuing care, which combines the continuation of support and the continuation of the strong relationships that young people in care have come to rely on. In conclusion, there are many issues I have missed. I will turn to those in stage 2 and 3. The ambition that Scotland should be the best place to grow up is one I think we would all subscribe to. We would disagree on how far we are from achieving it, but it's the right vision. The bill can play a part in delivering that, but it needs further clarity and ambition. Clarity around resources, clarity around practical implications, ambitions around early learning for 2-year-olds, aftercare and child's rights. And in stage 2, I think there's an opportunity to provide that clarity and vision, but this is building on an excellent start. Thank you.
Thank you. There really is no extra time in this debate. Bob Doris, to be followed by Cara Hilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a privilege to speak in this afternoon's debate. In doing so, I want to deal almost exclusively with kinship care and the development of the new kinship care order. In doing so, let me begin by reiterating my belief that kinship carers should be given parity of support with foster carers. I made a promise to campaigners at a national kinship care hustings in Postle Park in 2007 and have continued to champion that cause ever since. The views I expressed are heavily influenced by constituents of mine such as Jessie Harvey and Ruby Grant, members of the Kinship Care for the North Group in the city that I represent, and indeed several other groups within the city that I work with. Put simply, kinship carers step in and take on a caring role for loved ones, for children, when mum and dad is unwilling or unable to do so. If they were not there to pick up the pieces, then the life chances and life outcomes for the children would be far worse. It would also cost Scotland's councils a small fortune to instead use foster carers or residential care for these vulnerable children. Can I pay tribute to Adam Ingram, actually our former Children's Minister, for advancing the cause of kinship care when an SNP government was elected in 2007? Putting a kinship care outcome into the Scottish Government's concordat with councils was vital. It sought to move to parity of financial support for kinship carers with foster carers. Let's be clear, whilst that aspiration was not fully met, it did make a real difference. And I agree with the Child Poverty Action Group, who told the Education Committee the following. The initial agreement was to pay kinship carers who have looked after children at a rate to that for foster carers has not become a reality, but all local authorities have shifted to a position where they are making payments of some sort to kinship carers who have looked after children, and also that quite a few local authorities are making payments to some level of kinship carers of non-looked after children also. Not enough, but it did drive real change, and I think that's important to put on the record. Some kinship carers have asked me about the financial memorandum in relation to this bill, where cost savings have been projected on kinship care. They ask how can support be improved for kinship carers and also make cost savings at the same time. However, the financial memorandum also states that one of the reasons for developing the kinship care order is to reduce an unchecked growth in formal kinship care. In other words, as children in kinship care come to the attention of social work or are placed in kinship care by social work, and that's actually a vital distinction that, if I have time, I want to return to later, they are less likely to become formally looked after. Kinship care orders will still provide support, but crucially, the level of direct social work involvement will be less, because it needs to be less, than if the child was deemed to be formally looked after. I understand that this will lead to a projected saving in social work time, and that is the saving referred to in the financial memorandum. Fundamentally, though, it does not signal a reduction in direct cash support to kinship carers. I would welcome that clarity and reassurance from the Minister during her summing up. Can I also ask for some certainty in relation to any barriers to providing financial support for kinship carers? Can the Minister confirm there is nothing contained within this bill which instructs councils to pay less or, indeed, hinders them from paying more? Yes, of course.
Minister, afraid you have to face your microphone.
Kinship care order is going to enhance the support that we give to kinship carers by providing them with...
Minister, sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry. The kinship care order will enhance the support that we give to kinship carers by giving a section of them who have never previously had help and support, that help and support that they need, whether that's financial or not, but actually supporting them to ensure that they are the best possible family for that child to have a long and lasting nurturing life.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Minister for that intervention. Can I then move on to talk about the financial working group? I understand the Scottish Government set up and will be reporting shortly, because my understanding is that the financial package to support the kinship carers is not contained within this bill, and that is not what this bill is seeking to do, but that is the job of the financial working group. So more information on when that might report, how long it would take the Scottish Government to consider those recommendations, and what that may tease out, how that can be taken forward, would be very, very helpful also. In doing so, can also talk about the idea of a post-coast lottery and the consistency and how local authorities deal with kinship care. If I could speak about Glasgow, and I'm only singling out Glasgow because that's the local authority I know best. They decide on kinship care payments, and it's voluntary payments, £50 a week, and I welcome those. It's not enough, but I do welcome those. They make a distinction between whether or not granny or grandad goes into the vulnerable house and takes that child and looks after them because they know they're at risk, or if the local authority turns up on the doorstep and places that child to granny and grandad, because one was the local authority stepping in, another one was a voluntary arrangement. I don't think that these distinctions should be drawn when providing financial support for these families. So I would ask the Government to consider that. The final thing I would like to say is the need for consistency in social work assessments of kinship carers across the country. Kinship carers in Glasgow believe they're already going through an assessment process pretty similar to that of foster carers, and been asked some deeply personal information, including access to their personal medical records. So better guidance, better training and more consistency for these social work assessments would also be welcome. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I'm now very pleased to invite Cara Hilton to make her maiden speech in the Chamber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to be making my maiden speech in this very important debate on the Children's and Young People's Bill. It may be tradition to pay tribute to your predecessor in such speeches, but on this occasion I think the less said about my predecessor, the better. I'm extremely proud to have been elected as member of the Scottish Parliament for Dunfermline. Dunfermline is the local community in which I live. It's where my children go to school and nursery, and there is no greater honour than the opportunity to serve the people of Dunfermline at Holyrood. In my election, I gave a promise to my constituents that I would always put Dunfermline first. A promise that I would focus on the issues that matter to people in their everyday lives. And anyone that took part in the by-election campaign will know that Dunfermline is a growing area. We've certainly got a large proportion of young families. And the #1 challenge facing many of the young families that I represent is childcare. The constant challenge of juggling work, childcare, school pick-up times and family finances. A challenge that politicians in all parties say that they want to address, but for too long have failed to do so. And that's why I welcome the Children and Young People's Bill, and that's why I support its general principles. However, for the constituents I represent, I think that the bill is a missed opportunity, and I do think that it lacks ambition. 600 hours free childcare is extremely welcome, but it's long overdue. In fact, when the SNP originally pledged 600 hours, my oldest son was almost 3 years old. He was just about to start preschool. Like all my friends, I was looking forward to the extra provision that was promised in 2007. My son and his friends, they're now aged 9, they're in primary 5, and 600 hours still hasn't been delivered. And I think there are fewer better examples of Scotland in pause than the 7 years that the SNP have made parents in Dunfermline and across Scotland wait for free extra childcare. The reality is that we're still playing catch-up with England and Wales, where, despite the best efforts of the coalition government to dismantle the good work done by Labour, families continue to benefit from better provision than here in Scotland. At UK level, Ed Miliband has pledged to deliver 25 hours a week free childcare to working parents of 3- and 4-year-olds if Labour wins of 2015, and to guarantee wraparound childcare for families of school children. So why is it that the bill that we are discussing today does not include childcare provision for school-aged children? Why is it that the bill does nothing to address the unfairness of birthday discrimination, which means that a child born after the 31st of August has got to wait an extra 6 months, often until the end of January the next year, for a free preschool place? And why is it that the SNP government are happy for Scotland to be lagging behind the rest of the UK when it comes to providing care for some of our most vulnerable 2-year-olds? To coin a phrase from the Dunfermline by-election, Scotland deserves better than that. The fact is, this bill, as it stands, does very little to tackle the #1 issue facing families, which is lack of flexible, affordable childcare. As a mum of 3 children myself, I was delighted when my 5-year-old started school in August, not just because she was so looking forward to starting school, but because for the first time in years I was no longer paying every single penny that I earned in childcare. Up until then, with 2 preschool children in childcare, even with juggling my working hours to finish at 3 o'clock and pick up my eldest from school and my daughter from preschool, I was paying £1,200 a month in childcare. That was for a 4-day working week. Even now, with my oldest 2 at school and my youngest at preschool, like families across Scotland, I still pay more for childcare than for my mortgage. And the reality is that without the support of friends and family, I couldn't be standing here. I couldn't have stood for election to Holyrood when getting home in time to pick up 3 children from different locations by 6 p.m. is simply impossible. And I could never have afforded to return to work at all after having children if it wasn't for the support that a Labour government put in place at Westminster in terms of child tax credits to make work pay. Support which has been cut by a coalition government and means that so many mums and dads are now not having the option of returning to work after having children. As every parent knows, childcare costs don't stop when children start school. In fact, it's when children start school that some of the problems start. Parents face the challenge of juggling working hours around the school day, and let's not even get started on the 12 weeks a year school holiday. Many schools don't offer wraparound provision at all, and when they do, the hours are restrictive. The only way that most parents I know manage is by working different hours, taking different holidays. This cuts childcare costs down, but it means that families rarely spend time together. The chance of a family meal at tea time is a rare event. The reality is that for many mums and dads, just finding, organising and paying for childcare at all is like a full-time job in itself. Is it any wonder that a recent survey of mums by ASDA found that 7 out of 10 stay-at-home mums said they would actually be worse off in work than they are at home? So while I support the bill, I do believe it needs to go further. Childcare is a vital service for families, and every family in Dunfermline, every family in Scotland should have the right to high-quality, affordable and flexible childcare. Childcare shouldn't be a luxury that only the better off can afford. But the reality is that for many of the families I represent in Dunfermline, work is simply not an option due to the high cost of childcare. The family at Pitcorthie during the by-election who told me that they can never even hope their 2-year-old daughter having a little brother or sister because with both of them working, they'd never be able to afford the cost of childcare. The family in Dullock, where I live, who told me that they resorted to putting the childcare costs on credit cards. Rising food bills, energy costs, train fares mean they simply have got no other option. And how many other families are in that position in the run-up to Christmas? The mum in Abbeyview who told me she loved being a working mum, but due to cuts in tax credits, she had to give up the job that she loved. Parents in Dunfermline, parents across Scotland deserve better than a government that talks about delivering a better deal on childcare, but in reality lacks ambition. The Scottish Government has got the power now to revolutionise childcare in Scotland. We can do this now. Parents are fed up waiting. So while I will be supporting the bill today, I hope that across the political divide we can work together to deliver the better deal on childcare that families across Scotland deserve.
Thank you. John McAlpine to be followed by Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the bill as a significant advance for the position of children and young people in Scotland. As my fellow committee members have said, the committee has, in 2 other inquiries, looked at the outcomes for children who are looked after. We agreed in both those inquiries that we need to tackle the problems of underachievement and neglect and poor parenting before the family reach crisis point. We need a fundamental shift in philosophy and approach to focus on prevention. I believe this bill will help to do that, and that is the reason that so many child welfare organisations also support the broad principles of the bill. In Scotland last year, over 16,000 children were looked after. Although recent years have seen the number of new referrals fall, Scotland still has a higher proportion of looked after children than other parts of the UK. The Government estimates that between 10,000 and 20,000 children live with drug-abusing parents, and between 36,000 and 51,000 children in Scotland live with parents with alcohol problems. So it's a crisis that we really need to tackle. Presiding Officer, I mentioned the bill's important emphasis on early intervention to prevent serious problems before they occur. An important means of delivering that step change is constructing a system whereby it's easy for professionals to share information that could prevent a vulnerable child coming to harm. As the Minister has said, we're all familiar with the tragic cases covered in the news of child deaths at the hands of their parents and carers, and the common theme of the subsequent inquiries always tends to be the same. Someone had a vital piece of information that could have saved the child in question, but that information was not shared. That is why I want to concentrate today on the way the bill seeks to improve information sharing between relevant public authorities where there are concerns about the well-being of individual children and young people. Key to this is the introduction of the named person. This has been supported by 72% of respondents to the bill's consultation. It's supported by the Royal College of Nursing, by Tam Bailey, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, and by the wonderful John Carnahan, the inspiring co-founder of Strathclyde's Violent Reduction Unit. I think there has been considerable misunderstanding about the role of the named person. It already exists and works very well where it does exist, such as in the Highland region, and we've heard colleagues talking about the evidence from Highland region. It has to be universal because the problem without having a universal named person is that some children will slip through the net, and that's exactly what we're trying to prevent. And to some extent, we already have universal provision, and when you have a baby, you do have a health visitor allocated to you. Everyone has a health visitor allocated to you. And I had my children, which is quite some time ago now, the health visitor made one visit and saw that I had lots of support, and then was able to go away and concentrate on people who needed more support. So I think in that sense it's an extension of what we're already doing. The evidence from Bill Alexander of Highland showed how important the named person is as a means to ensuring that GIRFEC does what it's supposed to do. GIRFEC is rooted in cooperation between services with the child at the centre, and it ensures children and families receive holistic services underpinned by collaboration. The committee convener has outlined some of the operational concerns about how the named person would work in particular circumstances. And I would like to also endorse the comments of the convener regarding the definition of well-being and the lowering of the threshold for information sharing. In Scotland, under GIRFEC, well-being indicators are known by the acronym SHANARI. We're very used to acronyms in the Education Committee. Safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible and included. Now, they are all really positive things, and I think we would all want those for our children. But how will different professionals apply SHANARI when it comes to lowering the threshold for information sharing? I'm sure while most professionals will act responsibly, I don't think it's unreasonable to raise concerns, perhaps about overzealous individuals applying subjective views. I mean, for example, my children didn't travel to primary school by themselves. Some people would think that I was an overprotective mother. I believed that was my way of keeping them safe. But you could equally argue that another one of the SHANARI indicators I was breaching because, you know, they weren't as active, they weren't getting as much fresh air, they weren't included. So, I mean, people have different forms of parenting, and I think I would welcome reassurances that these well-being indicators, which I know are already established, but if they're used to lower the threshold for information sharing, that will be monitored by the government, and so that we can ensure that there aren't cases where it's perhaps abused and where interference doesn't go too far. But I do support the bill, and I support the principle of information sharing as a way to protect the most vulnerable children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Gavin Brown, to be followed by Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I begin my speech today just by congratulating Cara Hilton on making her maiden speech. which I thought was a pretty thoughtful contribution. And I predict that if she makes a similar speech at stage 3 of this bill, she may get a couple of interventions from government benches and perhaps elsewhere. But we shall see what happens with that. Presiding Officer, I want to focus the bulk of my remarks on the issue of named person, and specifically on the financial memorandum surrounding named person. This was a subject of Conservative business just a number of weeks ago. And as a member of the Finance Committee, it's something I looked into along with other members of that committee in some detail. And our difficulty with the financial memorandum relies on or focuses on the costs put forward within that financial memorandum. For local authority costs, for named person, for example, the prediction is that it will cost just shy of £8 million in the first year of implementation. The prediction is that in year 2, the cost will be nothing, exactly £0 and 0 pence. And when I first read that memorandum, I didn't think that was realistic and credible. When I read the evidence that was submitted to the committee from various councils and others, it became even less credible. And then when we heard from various councils at the Finance Committee, it became even less credible, to the extent that the Finance Committee felt that it wasn't credible and it wasn't something that was likely to happen in practice. So I listened carefully to what the Minister said today, and her response appeared to be, and I hope I've written it down correctly, is that she intended, or the government intended, to monitor this as it goes forward and is implemented. Now, I don't take huge comfort from that, because in my opinion, any policy that the government implements has to be monitored as it goes forward. That should happen regardless of whether there is controversy or questions asked about the policy. Every policy ought to be monitored as it is implemented. And of course, I'll give way to the Minister.
Minister. The member did say that he had read the contributions that had been given to the committee, and I just wonder if he read the one from Edinburgh City Council when they said the council believes that the costs and any savings for children's rights, GIRFIC, early learning and childcare and other proposals are accurately reflected based on our understanding of the requirements of the legislation. So given what he's just said, how will he respond to that, and did he read it?
Gavin Brown, we're now very tight for time.
I think the tone was a little uncalled for there, Deputy Presiding Officer. Of course I read it. I read every contribution that was made to the Finance Committee, and I've read every report to which the Minister has referred the committee subsequent to her response. Now, she will know Edinburgh had already implemented it, and so the financial costs on Edinburgh going forward will not be affected in the way that other councils will be. But let me read another council, because she's just cherry-picked one council who had already implemented most of it. The Scottish Borders Council said very clearly, "We believe that additional funding to support the named person needs to be available for more than one fiscal year." The Highland Pathfinder, on which I have to say the government rests almost everything, showed it took several years to implement the cultural changes required within and across organisations in order to implement GIRFIC. Scottish Borders Council believes funding requires to be available over 3 consecutive years, starting in 14-15, to ensure the successful establishment of the named person role. Now, it couldn't be clearer, Deputy Presiding Officer. It took a number of years with Highland Council. Just give me a moment. It took a number of years with Highland Council. I read also in detail the Highland Council report to which the Minister referred me, to which I'll return, but I will take the convener of the committee's intervention before that.
Stuart Maxwell.
I'm very grateful for you for taking the intervention. I'm very interested in what you have to say.
Possible.
I'm very interested in what you have to say. But surely you accept that a Pathfinder project will always take longer to achieve these things because it's designing the system which others will then follow. So clearly the amount of money and the amount of time it takes for a Pathfinder to do it is always going to be greater than those who come after.
Gavin Brown.
I think that's probably true, Deputy Presiding Officer, but what I don't accept is that going forward you can implement it in year 1 at the cost of £8 million, but by year 2 the cost is 0. No doubt we learn lessons with Pathfinders, and it may be faster than it would have been with Highland Council, but nowhere has anyone or any council with any credibility suggested it will cost 0 in year 2. If anyone has evidence that it will cost 0 in year 2, I'd be very grateful to take an intervention from them, whether that is a minister, a convener of a committee or anyone else.
Final minute.
Into this. Deputy Presiding Officer, The same can be said of the NHS costs put in the financial memorandum, because again they say it will cost £10 million in year one, yet by year 3 it will only cost £5 million, half of that amount. This was described as not credible by the health boards who gave evidence to the committee, and also by the Royal College of Nursing. So the experts who are giving evidence to the Finance Committee made it clear these costings are not credible. That's why the Finance Committee en bloc, without division, raised these concerns, and the answers we've had back, in my view, haven't been good enough. The reason all of this is important, Deputy Presiding Officer, is because by creating the bureaucracy that they do create, by giving it to everyone, whether they need it or want it, you are taking money away from those who need it most in order to create the bureaucracy.
I've already cut
I'll
the
leave
next
it there,
member.
Deputy Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call Colin Beattie. I'm afraid I can only give you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be able to speak on this bill, and obviously as a member of the Education and Culture Committee I've been very much involved with the bill. As Stuart Maxwell has already said, the Education Committee has agreed the basic principles behind the bill, and it's evident that there is widespread support from various children's charities and public bodies. Barnardo's, in their written submission to the committee, remarked, "This bill has the potential to be one of the most far-reaching and influential bills considered in this session of the Parliament. At the heart of the bill is a vision that Barnardo's strongly shares, making Scotland the best place in the world for children to grow up." And I think we can all subscribe to that. It's important that we ensure that we don't lose sight of the fact that this bill is about protecting vulnerable children, and we must put that at the heart of all our arguments. Looking at the named person aspect of this bill, I've been very struck by the level of support indicated in the Government's consultation, and I note that 72% of respondents supported the idea of providing a named person for all children and young people under the age of 18. I think it's also worth looking at the evidence provided in a survey carried out by Children First, which received 117 responses from kinship carers and support groups. It found that 90% of those surveyed felt that every child in Scotland should have a named person, and additionally some 78% felt that a named person would have been personally beneficial to them and their families. And in this particular instance, we have a ready-made example to look at. The Highland Council successfully put named person into practice in 2010 as part of their Getting It Right for Every Child, or GIRFEC approach. And in their evidence to the Education and Culture Committee, they highlighted the fact that named person has led to there being a clear process for ensuring that relevant information is passed to the correct person, in contrast to the previous system, where information was bounced around various agencies in the hope that it got to the relevant organisation at some stage. The consequence of this has been earlier support to and more effective intervention for children. Getting that support to a child usually means it's more likely to lead to a successful outcome. So we have irrefutable proof that a named person can be a successful approach if it's done right. It has both the evidence to back up its success and widespread support, and I believe it makes up an important element of the bill. Moving on to childcare, I fully support an increase in free nursery provision from 475 hours to 600 hours for 3- and 4-year-olds and looked after 2-year-olds. It will benefit 120,000 children across Scotland and will mean an increase of 45% in the amount of free nursery hours provision since the SNP came to power in 2007, a fact that Cara Hilton should perhaps reflect on. While on this issue I feel there is more to be done, the Government has, with the powers it has, acted and provided more support for families than any government in this Parliament to date. However, I can't help but consider the countless other things that can be done with the powers of independence. We can work with the powers of independence, we can work to ensure further support for parents and their children. The Scottish Government estimates suggest that Westminster welfare reform will put 50,000 children in poverty by 2020, and it's time we took control of our own affairs to protect our young people from Westminster. And I particularly welcome the First Minister's statement at the SNP conference when he said, "I believe a transformational shift towards childcare should be one of the first tasks of an independent Scotland." I also noted with interest the First Minister's announcement that the Council of Economic Advisers has been asked to analyse the social and economic implications of raising levels of childcare in an independent Scotland. Presiding Officer, I would also like to highlight the issue of kinship carers. The kinship care order included in this bill will provide great support for kinship carers, and I am pleased to note that the Scottish Government is currently reviewing financial support for kinship carers to address inconsistencies across the country.
Final minute.
And again, I refer to the Children First survey, which shows that 60% of kinship carers thought a kinship care order was a good thing, with a further 27% who wanted more information. It was no surprise that 60% said they would apply for a kinship care order. But we must remember that before the SNP election of victory in 2007, there was no support for kinship carers in Scotland, and successive governments at Westminster have, since 1997, failed to consider the needs of children in kinship care through the benefits system. I'm proud that this government, in its last parliamentary session, it was this government in the last parliamentary session who launched the Looked After Children in Scotland regulations, allowing local authorities to give vital financial support to kinship carers. But I'm deeply concerned that the Westminster government is threatening to undermine that support that the Scottish government provides. I'm running short of time, so I'll run quickly to the end. It seems evident that being proactive is always a better approach than that of being reactive. Preventative spending will help us to ensure that our children get a better start in life right from the beginning, and it provides added benefit in that it helps ensure greater value for the public purse. Spending now should always reduce spending later. This bill is an important milestone towards achieving better outcomes for our children, and I commend both the Scottish Government and my colleagues in the Education Committee for the huge amount of work done and for bringing the bill before Parliament.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the closing speeches. I'm disappointed to note 2 members who participated are missing from the chamber. I call on Mary Scanlon. A very tight 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I would also like to congratulate Cara Hilton on her maiden speech, and I would like to say that she certainly made the most of our policy of non-intervention in maiden speeches, and well done her. And I'm sure she'll continue with the same passion and commitment in future debates. And before starting my speech, I'd like to remind my colleague on the Audit Committee, Colin Beattie, that we do not have independence in the Highlands, but I think every single member in this chamber has commented on how well GIRFEC and other measures are working in the Highlands. So we can certainly do an awful lot without needing independence. Can I also congratulate the committee on their excellent scrutiny of this bill, and as not being a member of the committee, I do commend the complexities and of the bill, which I'm obviously coming new to. But having sat through many bills since 1999, I would like to acknowledge the very measured and constructive speech by the committee convener, Stuart Maxwell, which I thought was commendable. As Liz Smith said, the Scottish Conservatives agree with some, perhaps many, of the stated intentions of the bill and proposals. In particular, we agree that we should do more to increase a collaborative approach to ensure that children's services are delivered more effectively. And in particular, we very much agree, as others have said, with the plans to extend childcare, the better and enhanced nursery provision, and if I could also say the better training of nursery staff, which compared to 1999, many things were not being picked up at nurseries, such as autism, dyslexia, which Margaret McDougall mentioned today, and many others, and I do commend the training of our nursery staff. And also, as Bob Doris and others said, the additional support for kinship families. I thought Neil Bibby's point on health visitors was critical. And in evidence to the Health Committee some years ago, we were giving overwhelming advice for the retention of health visitors from Dr Phil Wilson. And over recent years, probably the past decade, we've seen a demise of health visitors in this country, not something that we've supported, but I am pleased, having met Bill Alexander, the Director of Social Work in Highland last week, I am pleased that Highland are now employing more health visitors, and we very much support that and hope it will be replicated throughout Scotland. We do have several concerns, and one was stated by Professor Kenneth Norrie. The bill in its current state allows ministers to have more powers, which are open-ended and not well defined enough at this stage. And as we know from some key witness submissions, there are concerns about the proposed extent of data sharing, the extension to the powers of the Children's Commissioner, and the dilution of parental and family responsibilities. I do support the point made by COSLA that the Children's Commissioner should be the last resort after all local avenues of complaint have been exhausted, and we'll obviously keep a watching eye on this, but whether the additional £160,000 to fund the Commissioner's office is value for money, only time will tell. And I say that with my corporate body hat on, because to get additional money you would have to come through this Parliament and members of the corporate body. Expecting all children to have a named person in the terms stated does threaten to take away resources from those children who are the most vulnerable. John Stevenson of Unison said that the bill would necessarily mean that children's services would have to deal with far more children than is currently the case, and like the EIS they added concerns about the implications for resources and training in an already well-stretched budget. If you don't mind, I've less than 2 minutes and quite a bit to cover. And can I just say, as a lecturer for 20 years before coming here, I thought, now, if I'm a named person for 16 to 18-year-olds coming into further education, I really wouldn't have thought, I wouldn't even know where to start and what I had to look for. So I think anyone that assumes there's no training, I think that's just a little bit naive. There are also practical concerns as well. What happens when the relations break down between the named person and the family? And what will the relationship be between the named person and the lead professional? And whether there really will be a single point of contact. And I thought Stuart Maxwell raised a good point. During the summer holidays, for example, the named person changes. So these are many of the important questions which I think is reasonable to raise at stage one. And I have no doubt that more clarity will come as we continue through this bill. And I rush through my speech here. Unison also stated that it was anxious that the proposals were not clear, and that this rather woolly approach, as they stated, would mean that to cover their backs, named persons would end up sharing information which, strictly speaking, they didn't have to. And I did feel that Joan McAlpine made some very good points, which were very constructive in this respect. And just finally, Presiding Officer, when I visited Inverness College a couple of weeks ago, there were 2 Gypsy Traveller girls. And I wondered, well, who's their named person? What were their families going to think about them having a named person? And that's a very specific community.
I'm afraid
and I really wonder if any thought has been given to the Gypsy Traveller sector.
Thank you very much. And I now call Neil Bibby, maximum 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Cara Hilton on her maiden speech. Cara showed passion and commitment in her speech, the sort of passion and commitment that helped her win the Dunfermline by-election. As Cara said, and as my colleague Jane Baxter said at the start of this debate, Labour supports the principles behind the Children and Young People Bill. Labour wants to make Scotland a better place for children to grow up in. Labour believes we need to get it right for every child and supports the aspirations to improve life chances for children and young people in Scotland. However, in common with some of the evidence, and as has previously been said this afternoon, we believe the bill lacks ambition. We have concerns about practical issues, concerns about wording, concerns about detail, and concerns about financial and resource issues, which will be difficult to sum up in a 7-minute speech. But put simply, getting it right for every child means getting this legislation right, and we cannot let this be a missed opportunity. There are a considerable number of issues that the Education Committee heard from organisations and individuals. We have heard a significant number of them repeated today. We've also received a high number of briefings this week raising specific concerns. I'm going to raise a number of those issues presented to us this week, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Children in Scotland and all the other children's and youth organisations for their helpful briefings in advance of this debate. The bill was described to me at first, or a while back, as 4 bills in one. It's clear we need a joined-up bill and a joined-up approach. And I think we should be concerned when the NSPCC say there appears to have been a little strategic thinking about the position of children's services in the raft of legislation currently underway in Scotland. We are concerned that the disparate nature of the various pieces of legislation which affects children's services indicates a lack of coherent vision for how the whole range of services meets the needs of children. They are, of course, not alone in raising concerns on the children's rights section. There have been concerns raised that the Government's proposals do not extend children's rights, nor will they make a practical difference to children's lives. The Law Society of Scotland described the duty of ministers as a diluted version of existing obligations. It also noted that it only requires ministers to consider the UNCRC, but not to act or explain those considerations. And Children in Scotland notes that the proposals fall short of those embraced by the Welsh Assembly. There have also been a number of suggestions from UNICEF and others about the use of children's rights impact assessments and the duties on public bodies. We will, of course, have to look at these issues again at stage 2. We have, of course, also heard a great deal of concern about the controversial named person proposals. As I said earlier, the Royal College of Nursing have said quite clearly that the Scottish Government must recognise the Education Committee's concerns regarding the capacity of the health visiting workforce to deliver existing duties, let alone those associated with the named person. The health visitors, the people on the ground, are telling us that they need an additional 450 health visitors. And I would gently say to the Minister, this doesn't need monitored, that needs acted upon. They also went on in their briefing to make a shocking statement that it's not currently known how many health visitors there are in Scotland. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is extremely concerned by that comment. So I would just again say to the Minister, if you don't know how many health visitors there are in the first place, how can you monitor that or expect them to take on this additional role? Other concerns have also been raised. Children First said we remain concerned about the potential for confusion, which we already have experience of directly in practice, between the role of the named person and the lead professional. Youth Link Scotland have also called for clarity on the practicalities of a named person for a young person under the age of 18 who has left school. Questions have also been raised about the inadequate funding for training and about who will take on the duty during school holidays. These issues aren't going to go away by themselves, and the Minister and Government need to take them seriously and address them accordingly if they want this to be supported and they want this to work. We have also been lobbied by Who Cares Scotland and a number of our constituents regarding care leavers. We have been asked to speak up for care leavers in this debate. I will speak up for care leavers, just as Kezia Dugdale and others have done. We should extend support for care leavers, and I hope the Government will consider these requests and look favourably upon possible amendments in this area at stage 2. On kinship care, I thought Jane Baxter made a very good contribution to the issue of kinship carers. The Government has to do more work to convince kinship carers of the merits of what they are proposing. Finally, I want to come to the issue of nursery education and childcare. I talked earlier about this bill should not be a missed opportunity. However, I feel it will be a missed opportunity and lacks ambition when it comes to nursery education and childcare. I welcome again the Government's flagship policy of an increase to 600 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds. But as we know, this was in the SNP manifesto in 2007. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, you will not solve the childcare problems of 2013 with a policy from 2007. John Swinney was on television the other night rightly saying that if we increase childcare and female employment, that would be a good thing and could create jobs. My message to the Government is, do it then. Actions speak louder than words. You have the powers to introduce more childcare than you are doing right now. Labour and Government acted to support and massively expand universal nursery education and childcare. The SNP and Government, in comparison, have done very little and instead offer empty and vague referendum bribes. Don't just take my word for it that this is unambitious. As Children in Scotland and Save the Children point out, this bill does not go nearly far enough in terms of support for 2-year-olds. Only around 1 or 2% of 2-year-olds to be guaranteed nursery in Scotland, when 40% in England are going to be offered it. You have a stated aim of making Scotland the best place to grow up in the world. You can't even offer the best nursery package in the UK. And you actually cut nursery funding for vulnerable 2-year-olds when you first came to power. There have been other concerns raised about the impact on quality of these proposals, the definition and split of early learning and care, flexibility issues, and the need to look at the issue that results in some children missing out on months of early years education. And as Children in Scotland note, this bill says nothing, absolutely nothing, about out-of-school care for primary school-aged children. And it's shocking that the Scottish Government rejected Labour's call for a cross-party childcare commission to look at this issue back in May. That is deeply regrettable. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the challenge for the Government is to act on the suggestions made and to deliver a better bill. We support the principles of the bill, but it's only as good as far as it goes. And at present, this sadly will not be a landmark piece of legislation, as the Minister referred to it, but a landmarked opportunity missed.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Michael Russell to wind up the debate. Cabinet Secretary, you have until 5.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And this has been by and large, with the exception of the last few minutes, a positive, useful debate. And the whole purpose of this bill was defined by Aileen Campbell at the outset, and I want to repeat what she said. The whole purpose of the bill is to improve children's lives. Everything we do or say about this should be judged in that way. I think that is absolutely correct, and I think, by and large, members have responded to that challenge. It is right to say that this is not a single bill. It was two bills coming together into one bill. We thought and consulted about the way of improving lives, doing just what Aileen Campbell has asked us to do. And I pay tribute to Aileen Campbell's leadership on this issue, leadership of the bill, leadership within the ministerial team, and I know she has a strong commitment, as have I, to continue to work with members across the chamber to improve the bill and to put it on the statute book. That's what we should be doing. And I thank all concerned in that process, and particularly the committee. The convener restated, I think cogently and eloquently, the constructive points from the committee. And they are constructive points. They are being considered by the Scottish Government. We are keen, as in all legislation, to improve the bill as it goes into detailed legislative scrutiny. Now, the bill will also have material added to it, because, as the convener indicated, I will bring forward amendments to the bill at stage 2 on school closure proposals, and I look forward to giving evidence to the committee on the 3rd of December, to discussing proposals about the subject which, by and large, though not completely, have been well received. And I thank Jane Baxter for her opening speech. I welcome the support that she indicated then. I'm certain that working together we'll be able to make the bill it best it can be, to ensure that Scotland is the best country to grow up in. And I'm positive we can find ways to go forward together. And I want to start also with this Smith's speech. I thought it was measured and positive, and I'm grateful to her. It is wise that we acknowledge that there is a concern within the Conservative Party about the named person provision. And I think the named person is a positive provision. And I have taken some time to be persuaded of that, because I wanted to see the work that was going on and the actions being taken across Scotland. And when you see the named person provision in operation across Scotland, it is immensely impressive. But it is wrong to define it as more work. It is about smarter work. It is about the way in which existing professionals change what they do and develop what they do to meet the challenges that exist. It is as much about... I will, of course.
Liz Smith. Thank the Cabinet Secretary, and particularly for his remarks just now. I think the concern that we have, as Gavin Brown instances his speech, is that if we are to develop these resources, we have a lot of evidence before us from a variety of stakeholders who are saying that we will indeed have to spend a lot more on the named person provision. And our concern is that we might actually be detracting from some of our most vulnerable children.
If I might say to the member without embarrassing her, I thought he should put it much better than Gavin Brown did, who got trapped by his ideological views. The member is putting it quite correctly. But I believe there is contrary evidence which is being put in a variety of places, and particularly by those who are doing the job, that it is not about increased activity, and it is not primarily about increased resource. It is about different methods of operation. I quote Bill Alexander in his speaking to the committee, who said, "It is much easier," this is about the named person, "to understand and know what is going on. What teachers and midwives tell me is it doesn't change what they do. It changes how they're regarded. They feel it has empowered them." Now, Bill knows more about this than I think almost anybody else. And I have found that to be true when I have gone and talked to people who are involved in it. I want that to be demonstrated to the committee and to the chamber. And if there are ways in which it can be demonstrated, it should be demonstrated. Because it is about enabling, about not enforcing. It's not about interference, it's not about approved parenting, it's not about substituting professionals for parents, it's about helping and assisting. And I think it's a very important innovation. So, of course.
An intervention. One of the issues that's occurred is some of the concern around the lack of consent for information sharing. Is there something that can be done within the bill to lay a presumption of seeking consent, except in those exceptional circumstances where welfare issues are at stake?
It is possible to envisage that being in guidance, but I would also, and I think the Minister would welcome a discussion with you and with others about this matter, because I think there are ways forward on it, and I'm grateful for that. I want to deal with very quickly one or two other points that have come across. Kezia Dugdale's anger about looked after children, I have that anger too. I expressed it in an article I wrote, I think, in 2006 about the Parliament. Up until that stage, had talked about this a lot, genuine feelings, but hadn't brought about change. This bill can help to bring about change, but it can also do what Kezia Dugdale wants it to do, which is to once and for all raise this profile in a way that makes us understand our responsibilities, makes society understand this issue, and make sure that we can progress this issue in the way that none of us have succeeded up until now. I want to say to Bob Doris, there is nothing in this bill at all that will interfere with the opportunity or rights of local authorities in terms of kinship carers, quite the reverse. And I want to pay tribute to Cara Hilton for her maiden speech. She was quite right to drop the convention of tribute to her predecessor at the beginning. To be fair to her, she dropped quite a number of other conventions as well, including the consensual nature of a maiden speech. But there was no harm in that at all. She has her mother's passion for those she represents, and I want to be unconventional too and pay tribute not just to the member but to her mum. Cathy Peaty is a loss to this chamber. We worked closely together in the first Parliament on the Education Committee. I regard her as a friend, and I always will. She was a doughty fighter for her constituency, for education, for schools and for Scottish culture. But Cara Hilton asked a number of questions of the Scottish Government. The answer to most of them lies in the need for this chamber to have full powers. Her election literature. No, if questions are asked, they should be answered. Her election literature asked why the SNP government wouldn't match Labour's commitment to 600 hours. With the greatest respect, I would suggest the question was put the wrong way. Why didn't Labour deliver those hours when they were in power? Indeed, it didn't even deliver 475 hours we have now. It was only delivering 412.5. So we are delivering. We could deliver much more with the full powers of a normal Parliament. Her election slogan said that deferment deserves better. I agree. I go further. Scotland deserves better than the limits her party have placed and continue to place on progress for her constituents. So let's have even more ambition for those powers. Now, the centrepiece of this bill is the 600 hours. It is there, it is on offer, it needs to be supported. And in being supported, then we will make a difference and we will make this country the best country in which to grow up. This bill is a major step forward. The fact that the Chamber wishes to support it across the Chamber is incredibly welcome. But the task with all legislation, Presiding Officer, is to make legislation as good as it can be. And with the work that's offered by Jane Baxter, with the work that's been offered by Liam MacArthur, with the consent and work of the Scottish Tories, perhaps except on one issue, though I hope we will be able to draw them into supporting that issue, we will have a bill to be proud of. We will have a country to be proud of in terms of how we look after and take forward our children. Then, with independence, we can do even more.
That concludes the debate on the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. The next item of business is consideration of motion number 8192 in the name of John Swinney on the financial resolution of the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. I call on John Swinney to move the motion. Cabinet Secretary.
Move formally,
The question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we now come. There are 3 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion number 8259 in the name of Joe McAlpine on the Borough Collection, Lending and Borrowing Scotland Bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 8326 in the name of Aileen Campbell on the Children and Young People Scotland Bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion number 8326 in the name of Aileen Campbell is as follows. Yes, 104, no 0, and there were 14 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 8192, in the name of John Swinnon, the financial resolution for the Children's Young People Scotland Bill, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. I now close this meeting.